of the special meeting of the Fairfax Planning Commission for February 25th. You're going to do the roll call, Linda?
Newton?
Okay.
Here. Green?
Here.
Hamilton? Here. Ackerman?
Here.
Fragoso?
Here.
Gonzalez-Parber? Here. Chair Kierline?
Here.
All are present.
Hey, I guess I have a motion, or Jim, do you want to make your comment first?
Yeah, if it's okay, when you're approving the agenda, I'd like to just, I should have put it on the agenda, that I'd like to just make a couple of timely comments, or comments about a couple of meetings coming up that I just want to make sure you're all aware of, and also for the public that might be watching at home. So I could do that right now if it's okay.
Yes, please.
Okay, I wanted to reiterate, I mentioned it last week, that the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee that's been working on the update to the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan are going to meet in this room next Monday at 7 o'clock. And this is a public scoping session on updating the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. And it's not a fait accompli, so anybody that has interest in pedestrian and bike improvements should come next Monday night to this room. And then the next council meeting on March 2nd, Wednesday, March 2nd, there will be an ABAG presentation of the Association of Bay Area Governments that is spearheading the Plan Bay Area process that we went through the first round on a couple of years back. They're now entering the second round, and they're going to make a public presentation on Wednesday, March 2nd. So that would be important for you all because it is the next whole impetus towards creating the sustainable community strategy. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess do we need a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So is there anyone here from the public who wants to speak on something that's not on the agenda? Okay. So I guess this technically isn't a public here. I mean, the public is invited, but we're not going to have any comment from the public, or shall we? We can open up to the public.
Thank you. Actually, as you go through the discussion, if somebody is here and they want to make a comment along the way, I think that given the number of folks in the audience, you could entertain that. If it gets to be where it's not really flowing with things, you could ask them to wait, or you could have an interval where you ask them to speak. So it's a discussion item moving towards drafting an ordinance. So it's up to your discretion. But you won't have a formal open to public hearing, close it off. It's going to be mostly for policy wonks. We're getting in the woods tonight.
Okay, so I guess the members of the public who are here, if there is an item that you're interested in, I guess maybe you can raise your hand, or you can come.
And I did put a couple of seats.
I guess raising your hand might be the best thing to get our attention to know that there's something you want.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing lifetime edits off this table, and so I put a couple of chairs here in front of the lectern. So if you want to have a better view of what we're editing, please come on up. We moved it so that the commissioners can see it, and also this will be live fed through the town's website. But please come on up and have a look if you would. And with that, I can go right into our item, if you like.
Sure.
Okay.
Let's start the, you have a staff report?
Yes,
okay.
The staff report. So the first page of your staff report is talking about the background that brought us to this point in time. And if you recall, it was only last week. Gosh, seems like so long ago. It was just last week that we were here with your regular Planning Commission meeting, and we talked about with this transfer of all the zoning in the what is called the highway commercial and an acronym CH to the central commercial, we talked about affordability, parking, and the fourth item last week was on transferring the allowable uses from highway commercial to central commercial, and not just the allowable uses, but those uses that would require a conditional use permit also. So rather than cut this discussion short, you all decided to come back tonight for a special meeting to have plenty of time to get into the details of transferring CH to CC. Yes.
I think last week we just did some regular planning commission. It was actually last month's meeting where we had the initial parking discussion and agreed to come back to this special meeting. I just wanted to correct you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so tonight we're going to focus on what had been number 4 in your previous staff report on January 21st. Thank you. The table, and the table's attached. And tonight we have Katie Wazinski, who is the assistant town attorney. Janet Colson is our primary town attorney who deals with the town council issues. And Katie is our brainchild, if you will, legal brainchild that handles all our planning commission items. So Katie was kind enough to craft this table to help guide us through this discussion. So she's here tonight as a resource should you have any questions about the table structure or implications with regards to whether something that had previously been in the highway commercial should be included in the central commercial or by conditional permit or not at all. Also, we have our new zoning tech, Michelle Levinson, who's here in our official hand, so we'll do real-time edits on the table that Katie's prepared. And Linda's actually going to walk us through the table line by line, and I think the game plan tonight is to take it a page at a time, and rather than just ask you to fill in the blanks, we'd like you to sort of make sure that you don't have any discomfort with what staff has recommended with regard to pulling any of the previous highway commercial, either allowed or by conditional permit uses over. So we'd like to just make sure we thoroughly vet each line as we go through. And but before we get into the minutia on the table, I just want to start with an overview for a second. As on the first page of your staff report, there's been a long timeline getting to where you are tonight in terms of eliminating the highway commercial bookends of town and bringing them back towards the central commercial piece of the historic fabric of town. So I would encourage you to think about the ramifications of what you're doing tonight. And what you are doing tonight is you're appointed officials, you're not elected officials, but you are crafting an ordinance. An ordinance is a piece of law. Zoning ordinances are part of police powers in this country, in this state. So you're putting on your lawmaking hat tonight. And I would also remind you that Fairfax is a thought leader in this county, in this state, in this country. It's the birthplace of safe routes to school, mountain bikes, environmental planning, urban growth boundaries, organic foods, organic farming. You are a figurehead in this county, in this state, in this country. And what we're doing tonight, is a small piece of that. The intent of the general plan was to make the town center more pedestrian, human-friendly. And the act of going away from highway commercial towards central commercial, in my mind, is following the best practices that are going on in this state, in this country, away from auto-centric planning towards pedestrian multimodal planning. So while this is really in the woods with crafting an ordinance and changing uses and whatnot in the downtown, there's a bigger picture here you're all involved with. This is tangential to mitigating greenhouse gases, to creating a sense of place. So as you go through these specific uses, I would encourage you to think about that. It's really going back to the future. This was originally a transit village, human scale, not auto-centric scale. And that's where you all, via the general plan and the policies in that general plan, are moving towards. And I might say I'm really happy that 3 of the members of the super committee, Shelley, Mimi, and Bruce, of the 7 people that got sequestered several years ago to finish that document, to finish the first whole general plan of this town ever, are here now sitting on the Planning Commission looking at the implementation of those policies that took over a decade to craft. And again, you all are the thought leaders, all of you. This town is in a pivotal place. So while this is a very in-the-woods bureaucratic exercise, this is an important exercise. Whether we're talking about diapers, drive-thrus, chain stores, grocery stores, or whatever. So I'm just trying to set the frame here. And with that, here we go.
Okay, so I'm going to read each item one at a time, and if you're,
I think there may be some questions or comments first.
I think you might want to, I'm not sure which one's working yet, Shelley.
Does this one work? Oh, look, it works.
Oh, good. Oh, my
good.
goodness.
Can I just ask a couple of overarching questions? Thank you for that kind of overarching introduction. Sure. And along those lines, I was reflecting on our conversation last time and some of the confusions that were coming up and some of the weeds that we got down into and then somewhat lost our way and was trying to figure out, wait, where are we? And along those overarching, before we get into that, so we are looking at land use, which means how we use the land. And part of that, to me, was looking at the way that we interact with our built environment, the front of the buildings, the back. You know, we talked about residential on the second floor, kind of where the use is located within the buildings and how we, as humans, interact with our built environment. And from that, I was thinking about the categories. We're switching. This is another kind of overarching thing. We're switching from these very specific upholstery repair versus cabinet making, I think we got into last time, and where should that be, and is it conditional or is it the same, is it different, and we're putting into these larger categories of retail, etc. And so one of the things that came up for me is, we had this discussion last time, is like, well, upholstery is okay, but maybe not cabinet making, or cabinet making goes in the back. Well, does that mean upholstery fixing goes in the back? If we're rolling these into the larger categories, do we need to have a conversation about those categories? Because, for example, in my mind, retail goes in the front, residential goes on the top, light manufacturing might go in the back. But if we go through these line by line and have the discussion like we did last time, where we say upholstery can go in the front, but cabinet making has to go in the back, well, we no longer have upholstery or cabinet making. We're rolling them up into one category. So that discussion is somewhat moot unless we're all willing to say light manufacturing goes in the back, those kinds of things. So and I think we might go through this much, much faster if we had that shared understanding before we drop down into the weeds, if that makes sense to anyone else.
I was thinking the same thing when I was going through this, that we didn't seem to have a category that was kind of like warehouse, light industrial, even possibly like large retail, that kind of thing. I mean, I think when there was a use that may have fit in that category, it was like it was left blank because it didn't fit into the traditional retail. So I think that's a good point.
So you know, this is what we're here for. It's all up to you guys. We're just here to facilitate you, and we've got everything set up to do that. I might add that Mimi brought up a very salient question last time, which was, why are we doing this? And I just want to articulate that whether we were just going to keep specific uses and then fold the appropriate ones into CC or do the generic categories, we still have to go through this exercise tonight. So the exercise of what to bring in as a right, what to bring in under a conditional use permit, or not to bring in, that exercise has to take place whether we do the generic groupings or not. And we've actually done a little research since Mimi asked that question. Both our zoning tech, Michelle Levinson, and our assistant town attorney have done a little thinking on that. So if we get to a certain point where you want to revisit that whole issue, we can talk about it.
But I think what I hear Shelley saying is that there's some uses that she would want to be permitted as long as they were located not in the retail frontage of the building.
Got it.
So
Got
you
it.
have to somehow like do your
Okay,
general
well,
categories and indicate which general categories can be on this at the street and which general categories should be in the back.
Thank you,
Right.
thank you. And
Right.
maybe Katie can help us on that.
Those may become conditions then to each category, to each of these new broader categories that we're creating could have conditions attached to them. But also there's a somewhat of a solution, I think, to these two specific suggestions, and that is kind of the idea of the larger business, the kind of the outdoor business that might do, and there's the CS zone, right? Do we still have the CS zone, which is sort of contemplating car lots and and Fairfax Lumbers and things like that. Isn't it? That's the feel I get for CS.
We're only focused tonight on CH to CC.
I know, but
Yeah.
some of these uses that we're saying no to doesn't mean
Thank
it might mean they're in another zone.
Yes, although I
such
think
as
we have
CS.
very limited CS, as we have very limited CL. Commercial service would be the CS, and limited commercial would be the CL. And we have one CR, recreational commercial.
Right.
So,
okay.
so this is what we're here for, and we've got the brain trust, so go ahead.
I'm afraid I'm cutting everyone off with this mic, but it sounds all right. I think it's a splendid suggestion to talk about the ways in which you actually want to see these uses play out in town and how they work along the property lines and how they work in the frontage and how they work for height. And so might I suggest that we consider using the notes column at the very end of the table there. And for example, if you look at animal grooming and supplies, well, let's say for a moment we are okay with keeping that in the new permitted uses, and we are okay with the new proposed use classification of animal retail, sales, and grooming, but we really only want that on the second floor. We could add a note here, just saying that, and then when we go and reconcile each of these things, every item that has that same note will get assigned superscript 1 or a superscript 2. And for each line item, we could go through and then carve those out and look at how we've divided them up when we create our use classification labels so that all of the like ones are similarly named. Does that make sense? Would that reflect what you're getting after here?
That would reflect what I was getting after, and I think the issue is if we are going to these new larger classifications, then we need some consistency unless we break them out further. So for example, if we say all retail is allowed in the front, we can't then have a discussion here about, art supplies can be in the front, but appliance sales and domestic has to be in the back, because they're now all going to be classified as retail. And so we won't have the ability, anything that we want to tease apart, we have to tease apart now via the new classification system. Just being mindful of that, because I think we were teasing them apart last time by, like I said, I remember the upholstery repair versus cabinet making, which we were having a discussion up here, which was somewhat moot because I think they were both being classified in the new classification system similarly, which means we wouldn't be able to necessarily tease them apart, or we would. I didn't think we could.
And I hear your concern there. I think that what I'm anticipating is that, say we go through these and we have 15 individual uses that you would like to see, these are fine for storefront uses. I would anticipate that there would be some commonality across those. And so when we go to start making our divisions, there would be some natural points at which we could separate this from that and describe, retail uses serving pedestrian needs as opposed to retail uses serving animals, some natural breakpoints that we could work with. But the other thing I would ask you to keep in mind is that we do have a lot of room to play here, and we should make the most of that. But we do have to still have, reasonable and rational distinctions for treating uses differently. So, the cabinet makers and the upholsterers, I wasn't here for the discussion. I assume there were, material reasons for wanting to treat those differently, but we would have to be able to demonstrate what those were just to stay on the right side of things. So that's another thing to keep in mind.
And Madam Chair, can I add something that's come to mind? One of the wonderful things about having Katie here, aside from her work already helping us this far, is that whenever we're drafting ordinances, Katie is the originator of those ordinances in an iterative process with staff and also what's transpired to create the impetus for. So this is really going to help because Katie will be drafting this ordinance that we will be bringing back to you when it's ready. So that's wonderful. And then the other thing is, as I mentioned in the last staff report when this was before you, is that we also have CEQA to contend with, the California Environmental Quality Act, which is a parallel process to inform you all and the public about impacts. Now, we have a document that covered the general plan, covered the update to the housing element, which this is a piece of. However, we will be watching closely as to whether or not, when all this is decided, the model that we used in analyzing the impacts is still sufficient. And if it isn't, we will have to revisit the analysis, the sequent analysis. My guess is that we'll actually be okay because we'll be eliminating uses that were in the highway commercial that are more carbon creating and traffic creating. But we'll see where you wind up.
Okay, yes.
One other consideration for me when we're rolling these into the larger classifications.
Can I ask you a favor, Shelley?
Sure.
That mic is really muffled. Can you use Phil's? My hearing is so bad.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So one other consideration for me when we were looking at rolling these into new classifications and then stamping all of that category as as permitted or conditional was a thought that I had was like, well, yes, that seems permitted to me, but I don't know if I would want to have it unlimited. Here's a very specific example, and this is just for me. Bars and liquor licenses. If they're all rolled into eating and or drinking establishments, there's no cap on the number of liquor licenses, hard alcohol establishments that we have in town. I'm not sure I'm okay with having just unlimited number of bars in town because we've now rolled it into a category called eating and drinking establishments that are permitted unchecked. So that's, and I don't know how you go about that in terms of whether a town can say you can have 60% of eating and drinking establishments as this kind, or whether we need to tease those ones out again so that we can, at some later date, and I am not suggesting whatsoever that we hold this up by adding this other layer of percentage allocations onto this, but I'd like to be able to, in some instances, maybe retain the right to distinguish those. Does that make sense?
I definitely hear your concern there. Oh, forgive me.
Kitty, can you pull the mic a little bit closer? I'm sorry. Thank you.
I definitely hear your concern there, and alcohol sales are indeed a very different animal than a number of the uses that we'll talk about tonight, and for that very reason, many communities choose to treat them in a more refined fashion than you might otherwise be comfortable grouping some other uses. So you might be very happy to have a general retail category that captures a lot of different uses, but you may want to have a more fine-grained approach to establishments that serve hard liquor, that serve regular alcohol, that have outdoor seating where liquor is served. And it might be very appropriate in that instance to have a finer grain applied there. And so we can talk about how to make that happen. And if when we get to those lines this evening, that's the will of the commission, we'll take that note down and I'll start expanding that section for your next review. And you can see if I've captured as much of that nuance as you would like.
Okay, well, that's kind of already built in. Did you prepare the draft ordinance? I mean, I don't know. It doesn't matter who did. Okay, it's already kind of built in there because you have, for example, the general category of animal sales and services. Under that, there's several subcategories of horse stables, kennels, etc. And then you have a general category of eating and or drinking establishments, and you have two subcategories with takeout services and with permanent outdoor seating. There could be a third category, with alcoholic beverages, that type of thing.
Precisely. So we would just flush that out a little more. We can talk about whether performance standards would be something that you would be interested in. But for tonight's purposes, I think all the information we really need along that line is that you would like more ability to draw distinctions amongst those uses, and we'll bring that back to you.
Right, and still keeping the categories general, because you may still not be distinguishing perhaps between bars and other alcoholic uses, although I don't know, maybe there's a sentiment to do that too.
Through the chair, on this same topic, doesn't the general plan have a time frame for bars and entertainment venues that serve liquor that have been established prior to a certain date? Does that continue?
You mean the zoning ordinance or the general plan?
the zoning ordinance, I think.
Linda, I don't believe so.
No.
Nothing comes to mind in the general plan.
And not the zoning ordinance either?
I can't off the top of my head.
You mean
Linda might.
something that says that bars established before a certain date are
Yes.
permitted in any that come in
Bars-
after a use permits? No, there's nothing like that.
Oh, I must have dreamt it.
I'm sorry to chime in here, but I think what you're thinking of actually has its genesis in other law entirely. So it's not a local law. It wouldn't be found in our general plan or our zoning ordinance. But there are well-established principles of vested rights that business owners may have as we move through the sort of evolution of the permitted uses here that we would be mindful of.
That wasn't what I was talking about. But for me, a final question on the difference between the two charts, the principal permitted uses and then the conditional uses. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the principal permitted uses, first of all, everything is in here that was in any of the uses before. And the only ones not carried over into the central commercial are some very explicit highway commercial uses, such as appliances, repair, domestic, and gas stations, that type of thing. But then, so those are permitted in the highway commercial district still, but not in the CC. But then for conditionally permitted uses, I assumed that all of those from the permitted uses would be transferred over to see if we want them as a conditional use, but that's not the case. There's a smorgasbord. Some are there, some are not, others are different. Does that make any sense?
It does, and that's entirely on my shoulders. So when I put this table together, it was really as an exercise for Jim and Linda and I to start a discussion about how we were going to approach this information with you. And so I took the liberty of filling out the table with respect to the permitted uses and showing this is what would happen to the CC uses in the CH. But I didn't go through that exercise with the conditionally permitted uses because there was no apples to apples comparison in a lot of the instances. There's a good deal of different nomenclature used between the CH and the CC for the conditionally permitted uses. And so once I got here, I thought, well, is it really my place to be suggesting to the town and to the commissioners what I think is an apple to apple, or should we just wait to hear from them as to what they would like to see carried over? So it's been left blank for your discretion to be exercised.
Okay, but my point is that, for instance, gymnasiums and athletic clubs, in principle permitted uses are only in the CH and do not transfer over to the CC, and yet I don't see that in the potentially conditionally permitted uses. And don't we have gymnasiums and athletic clubs being developed now? So I'm not understanding why some are listed and others not. But maybe we can just start going through the list, and when we get to those, we'll see how it goes.
Okay. I will say, just as a general measure, it was not anticipated that every use that was either principally or conditionally permitted in the CH would ultimately be allowed in the CC. It may be the fact that there are a number of CH that just are not allowed.
Okay.
And I see Shelley has a question.
If they're not allowed, can a variance be requested?
You can't issue a variance for a use. You can have a variance for a land use regulation, but not for a use. So it's going to be really important to capture the ones we want. You can always come in and ask for an amendment as a project applicant and ask that a permitted use or a prohibited use be permitted, but no variance. Yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mimi.
Hi, Katie. Glad to meet you. I had some broader picture questions before we launch into this, and I was at a little bit of a disadvantage because I didn't bring the staff report from the January meeting that included the proposed ordinance language. In my packet, I have the list that we're going through now. But could you just give us a very short synopsis of the legal changes that would be proposed? We would be taking the language from the CH, section 17. If you could just tell me what section would be moved into the other section and where the more generalized descriptions would be located that would be added, that would just be helpful to get the puzzle pieces and for anybody else who might not have that document.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So as we're currently envisioning it, and of course it's subject to all of your input and direction, the existing CC ordinance, well, let's start here. The existing CH ordinance would be repealed in its entirety. There will no longer be a CH zone, so we won't have a CH ordinance. That is all gone. We would keep the existing CC ordinance, but it would look slightly different once you got to the permitted and conditionally permitted uses. And there it would look different because rather than have a list of 42 or 48 principally permitted uses and then another laundry list of conditionally permitted uses, we would have a much shorter table, we anticipate, of use classifications that captured a lot of those individually enumerated uses. Now, those use classifications would be defined back in the definition section of the zoning ordinance so that over time, as we update other portions of the zoning ordinance for the various residential districts and the other commercial districts in town, we would start to mimic the use of those use classifications instead of the individually enumerated uses until eventually we'll get to the point where all of the zoning districts have the same nomenclature. So that's really all that's anticipated to change.
And the specific sections are for the Central Highway Commercial Zone, the CH Zone, 17.096.10, that whole chapter up through 17.096.140 would be repealed.
Correct.
And then the next chapter, which is the CC, Central Commercial Zone, is what we're talking about amending. And obviously anything that referred to those sections and needed to be changed too.
That's correct. We would go through and make sure all the cross-references were corrected.
And then the definition section, which is 17.008.
That would change as well. And there is, I think, one additional section that would come out that has the APN listings for all of the parcels that are currently in the CH. Those would all drop out, and that would be moved to the CC section that had those listings.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
And the old, just for the record, I guess, since we're starting this, the old CC ordinance 17.100.0 series will then just be updated.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, commissioners? So I guess, shall we just start going down the
I'll read
list
'em.
now?
Okay. So the first one we have is alternative birthing centers licensed by the State Department of Health Services. They are now a permitted use in the central commercial zone, and we are recommending that they remain a permitted use.
Okay, so I know, Bruce, you had some comments last time, and I don't, but if maybe you could refresh us, because I don't remember, and I think they were important.
The comment I had made was that this, and I assume this is after the change, that pursuant to the comment I made the meeting before last, but the comment was basically that the term alternative birthing center, especially if you capitalize all three words, is actually a term in California state law that means a certain kind of thing. And it isn't the kind of birthing center that's likely to ever be created in Fairfax. It's most commonly a birthing center that's adjunct to a hospital. And alternative birthing centers are required to have incubators and a doctor on duty 24/7 and all sorts of stuff. They're a different level entirely. And so this, using the term alternative, is kind of, it caused confusion when this was actually added to the zoning, because then some planning commissioners back at that time went and did their research, and they found alternative birthing centers, and they found all this stuff, all these requirements for them, and that was a different thing entirely. So that was the gist of the comment. And I see that this now changes and says unless the requirement is waived by the state, and I think hopefully that would be understandable to future readers, but I think that would accomplish the goal.
Well, Bruce brings up a good point, and that is that the ordinance is made public for a reason, and that is the public needs to get an understanding from it. So we should, if necessary, I think we should correct. I mean, I agree it should be allowed, but we should correct the language to make it clearer. Another vagary here is Department of Health Services, licensed by. I think it would be good to specify what license that is. And that will certainly tighten up the definition there. And then, is there a new use classification for this, is my question.
I believe that last time we talked about a new use classification for this, and if I'm hearing you correctly, what you were talking about with lowercase, not uppercase, is like a health and wellness center that's not a medical services center. In other words, uppercase had incubators and medical services, like actual medical services being provided. Or, I mean, for me, there's a distinction between medical and non-medical wellness centers. So I don't know if that's what you were talking about. But those were, I think last time we used the word health services center as a classification category when we were talking about this. But I don't know if it's medical. And then my other quick question is whether any of, and this has to do with licensing and specific meanings for terminology, whether the terms and definitions that you have track with like an SIC code for business SIC codes, or I think they're now called NASIC codes, in order to distinguish whether there are specific legal terms for those.
I'm very glad you brought that up. These uses that are listed are straight out of the Fairfax Code as it exists today, and I honestly don't see many correlations between that and either NAICS or the land-based coding system. So I think that these are just terms of art that have developed in Fairfax over time. So what I think would make sense, if it works for you all, is to adopt our own use classification names, and if we wanted to use something like health services here, we could. But then when we're defining these terms in the definition section, we could say including, for example, and list out some examples of individual uses that would fall within that category, and it would be at that point that we would distinguish whether or not alternative birthing centers, capital A, B, C, were or were not included within that use classification. Would that work for you all?
I guess I kind of missed what your proposal was, but just to answer Shelley just very quickly, that doesn't really capture the distinction that I was trying to make. I'm not sure whether this could get into the weeds on this one. We're still on the first line, right?
Could we just put a note that
11 pages.
That's why we're here for this one item.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Could we just put a note that says we need to further evaluate the terminology associated with this particular use as we move forward?
You're on, Michelle.
Okay. And if I could add to this use might be more specialized, and maybe we might need to go back to this one, because I see it. We do have in this list of classifications, there's offices, there's medical office, so maybe that's could be listed under there, but I'm not sure. We may want to look at it, is if like medical offices, are they something that might need a use permit? I'm not sure. So that's why I think maybe this is one that might need, I think it's reasonable that we may need to go back to some as we go through other ones that we see are more similar, that some of them we may need to go back and look at them again.
Thank you for that direction. And I would just add that in response to your concern, Commissioner Ackerman, if it is indeed the case that this is a highly specialized form of care provider that we don't actually have in town and we do not anticipate attracting to town anytime soon, maybe what we can do is just come back with the actual legal definition of this particular use for our next discussion. And at that time, you can make the decision as to whether or not you want to add it into a new use classification system or let it fall by the wayside.
I think you might miss the
good.
point, though, which is that we didn't want to prohibit a specific type. Anyway, I think that, the discussion about wellness center as a potential classification is a possible thing for including and exploring.
Just to state that this language was put into the zoning because there was actually a use. There was a building in town that was used this way.
So, Madam Chair,
so
just to make sure Michelle is getting clear direction, if you could sort of coalesce when there's an interest in adding a note, I think it's important for you all to agree on the notes that are being added rather than unilateral.
Well, I'm wondering if it makes sense. I guess I would assume that as we go through this table, we'll find others that require that we want to put a note on saying more research is needed. And
I just want to make sure you're all working as a group, giving Michelle, who's our hand right now, direction, so that it's not a unilateral note that then comes back and says, well, I didn't agree to that. We need sort of a consensus.
No, I think what I was going to suggest is that it seems like, sad to say, this is probably going to require another look on by the commission in terms of those issues that we particularly made a note. And so this note could say that we're going to look at it further, staff will look at it further, and then come back to the commission with specific.
And Madam Chair, you're in control of this conversation.
Okay, yes, Shelley?
I would like, since we're not approving an ordinance tonight, and we've done this in the past where we're approving things and to a point where we're feeling comfortable passing this on to the town council with our notes. It may be that we're like, further evaluation, direct staff to further evaluate and bring that further evaluation back to the town council as opposed to us. I mean, I think we might want to distinguish between that process-wise. And then I agree, I think if we could be, like, I would like to make a motion or suggest that we type in the box that says classification on this line, wellness center, if everyone is okay with that, so we can move on.
Well, I could just say about this particular use, there's a generic term. I just kind of looked, and birth center is the sort of the generic term for this across the country. So there's a suggestion right there. Then we don't have to get into. I mean, there's an alternative birthing center that claims to have it trademark that. So it's who knows what that means. We don't. So yeah. Evaluate the language in the future, I would say, would be a great note.
And just through the chair, just to muck it up a little more, I see a difference between a birthing center, as Commissioner Green stated, and the wellness center that Commissioner Hamilton is talking about, and medical offices, which we will get to in a couple of pages, are allowed when not located on the first floor, including medical and dental offices. It doesn't specify, but I'm assuming that could be a wellness center, whereas I think a birthing center could perhaps be more appropriate on a first floor, particularly in an old building that doesn't have elevators. So just to...
Yes, I think there's, would you like to make a statement?
If you wouldn't mind going to the mic, because
Yeah.
we've got to get you on the record. You have to walk around and push the button if you would, please. You don't have to give your name or address, but you can.
Button? There. I just wondered, I don't know if it's addressed later on in these items that are called out, but if you say alternative, not only birthing center, but possibly health center, wellness center, alternative health services, i.e. acupuncture, chiropractic, things of that nature. I don't know if they're included elsewhere, but if they could be included here, that would be nice.
Okay, thank you. So maybe do you want to say something, Shelley?
Yeah, I guess my distinction between a wellness center and a medical office, as opposed to using the word alternative, which to me feels a bit subjective to whoever thinks something is, I mean, unless we're using the word alternative as into non-medical, if that's what the meaning, so that was my distinction, was if you, a wellness services could be acupuncture, could be Reiki, could be birth, I was just distinguishing versus a medical services.
And would you agree to have those on a first floor or in not on a first floor as the medical and dental offices are listed later on down the chart?
First floor would be fine to me, although my personal perception is the intention is the front store fronts. So again, this is kind of land use as in how we use the land. When I look through these categories, I think of storefronts as activities where pedestrians come and go because you're trying to create like a hum and a buzz to a street front. So you want something where people are going to be coming and going. So like personal services or wellness, people are going to be coming and going in and out the front door versus things that are quieter or not coming and going would be in the back of a building to me. That's not a category, so we'll have to kind of think through what that may mean. Like an orthodontist place might have people coming and going a lot, but a medical devices office wouldn't, so that would go in the back.
Yes, Mimi?
One just comment to something that Shelley said earlier. I kind of disagree about sending it up to the council because I think we're going to be taking up the actual ordinance language. So I think when we take it back to ourselves.
Okay, and I would just want to, Shelley, in the categories of the office as medical, there are some of the chiropractors listed under there, acupuncturists, so it looks like we're listing some of these uses that could be considered wellness. They're kind of all lumped together in the medical category.
Okay. Ready to move on?
So I guess I guess we should agree, get a consensus. Is it a permitted use or should it be a conditional use?
Well, I thought this one was going to require some additional
Oh,
evaluation.
okay. All right. So
what-
then,
that's
alrighty.
what
So
she's
that's
typed in the box.
a good point, Linda. We'll let's
But-
go on to.
But
That's
I
what you're gonna
didn't
decide
hear
later.
disagreement that it would be permitted in the CC zone, right? Everyone agrees.
So in terms of process, were we envisioning that, for example, this one doesn't have a new use classification listed, so would we, maybe we'll just set the whole thing aside and get back to it, I don't know, but if we were going to finish this line, would we need to decide what classification it's going to be part of?
Or Katie can suggest something when she comes back, right?
We're happy to suggest something for your consideration. Really what we were most concerned about tonight is not the existing uses in the CC, because theoretically the general plan doesn't direct us to make any changes to those, but rather which uses from the CH will come along into the CC. So I don't want to shut down any discussion, but those are the ones that we really need your input on. There are lots of them. But I can suggest something for our next meeting if you would like for our use classification here.
Through the chair, if that's the case, should we go about looking at this form instead of the nitty-gritty of every single line item, go through page by page and see, is there anything here that's permitted that we don't want permitted? And do we have some major discrepancy with how it's described? I don't know that we need to be here till midnight covering every little detail if the whole thing will be coming back to us with staff and the attorney putting the categories and the titles together.
But to the extent you can give us direction so we can get it right.
Yes.
And I, for one, like Shelley's idea of wellness center or, you know, all what Jane was talking about, alternative health center as a broader use category.
Okay, so I think that was a great suggestion,
just so
Norma.
that we sort of get into the pattern here. So our hand has done what the hand needs to do.
Could you capture Mimi's comment in the new use classification box that's currently empty? And when we suggest those new words or refined words, put them in that box. So health, either you could list the options are wellness services, health services, or alternative health services to be determined.
Well, it's a general category that you might put other uses in, so.
To be determined via the instructions in the notes section, right there.
If we end up creating a new category with this, we'll probably do the same as is done with offices of medical, list various types of medical offices will eventually, but not here in the chart.
So what I heard Norma say, are you all willing to have us say we're on page 1, give you like 10 or 15 minutes to go through page 1, and then just let us know if you have an issue with any of what's down there or if you want to add anything? And we'll do it page by page rather than me read each one. We're willing to do it either way. You tried it that page by page way last time and it wasn't successful, so.
Yeah,
I did go through this for myself and make notes on a few. For example, I don't have any other notes on page 1. So if we're all at kind of that same point, then I think it could work to go by page.
Okay.
Or perhaps the question would be, on page 1, there are only 2 items not allowed in CC, appliance repair, sales, and domestic sales and domestic appliance repair. Does anyone have a problem with not allowing those?
Well, I think I have a comment regarding the appliance repair. It was kind of like this light industrial use, I think, that we decided maybe needs to be a new category. And perhaps it's like a use that might need a conditional use permit in a CC, whereas if it was in the what is it, the CS, then it might be something that's permitted. So. But that's not where. So that's the type of thing that I see like at the rear of a
So
building.
do you want to maybe go down the table and poll the commissioners? We'll see if everyone. What I'm hearing is you think that might either in the central commercial zone, if someone wanted to do something like that, it might require a use permit, or you just want to prohibit it, not include it as permitted or conditional. Those are kind of your choices.
Okay. Shelley, you have a comment?
This was one of the ones where I'm okay permitting it, but not in the retail, not in the storefront. So it would be permitted as long as it's not storefront. So light industrial, we talked about last time, appliance repair, food processing, automotive repair, baking, food, those kinds of things.
So
we would permit them, but not on a storefront.
So under notes, we can say permitted in the rear of a building, conditional use permit at a storefront.
Or, maybe there's something right on Drake in a much larger commercial zone, in the back of a I don't know, that it could be not like right on.
Well, you're not going to be able to cover you know, everything. So, I mean, if you had someone come in on Sir Francis Drake and they wanted to put something like that in the front, they would need to come to you for a use permit.
I would not want it to occupy a storefront because I think that needs to be more
So that's-
retail, pedestrian scale.
So would you
vote on that?
preclude
I'd like it in the back
So
somewhere.
if I hear you right, you
Permitted
would
in
not,
the rear.
by a right, want it to be in the storefront. Would you want it to have the opportunity to apply for a conditional use permit in the front, in a storefront?
No, someplace
No.
other than the storefront.
So no chance of a storefront.
So we just say that it's permitted in the rear.
So, and then we need 4 heads nodding.
Or
Yes, I think that's a good
hands.
idea. But overall, can I ask a question? Is there a sort of overall idea here of some of these uses not having to come to hearing as often, or? So
That's when they're
so
permitted.
If they're permitted, that's it. Just staff
We
approves,
can
you're done.
approve them over the counter.
And if they're conditional, then they're not permitted, and we have to come to us. Okay, so fine. So the only other thing I have on page 1 is the bars. I think we need an additional category under food and beverage sales, a subcategory for with alcohol. And other than that, you know, we
And
have so
then the
many.
bars would require a use permit, is that what you're?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be a conditional, yeah.
Okay, I think there was a member of the public who wanted to speak.
Hi, I live downtown at 47 Bolinas. My name's Todd Greenberg, and I'm here tonight just hopefully to be a good member of the community and contribute where I can and have a balanced community. And what I'd like to throw out as an example that I'm not sure if anyone's contemplating, thinking that, hey, this probably doesn't belong in the front of a store, and let's make sure it's only in the back of a store, and is an example of what I think was really valuable for a long time in Mill Valley, a little place called Mr. Fix-It, where anybody could bring any of their broken items, and the guy knew how to fix it. You know, and all those types of businesses are sort of getting forced away. It's like an old-time skill where you have a guy like Tony, who's a cobbler, who could go fix things, and Mr. Fix-It, who could fix things. And to me, it's sort of a loss to the community if you can't have a business like that. Just food for thought, that's all.
Okay, thank you for your comment. Okay, Shelley?
So I don't know if we're doing formal motions, but it sounds like you're asking for nodding of heads or some way of deriving consensus. So I was going to make a motion that you put the appliance repair domestic line item in the, you have permitted in the rear of the building only, okay? And fill in the empty box there with light industrial as a suggested new category?
Well, before you go ahead and move, can I say something?
Sure. I was just trying to be clarifying so people can reflect.
Mimi, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just reacting to Norma's statement about not wanting people to be able to come in for a conditional use permit for a front of the store, and Todd's comment about Mr. Fix-It, it seems like I would still like to leave open the door that a store frontage, you know, Mr. Fix-It type of operation could get a permit because it would be within the character of the town.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree that it, in sort of envisioning something like this, it makes sense a lot of times for it to not be on the storefront. I certainly agree with the principle of not using our valuable storefront space for things that aren't really walk-in kind of businesses. But I also definitely agree with Todd's comment. And I would point out that the definition of the word appliance is rapidly changing over time. So we may think of toasters, but that's probably more obsolete than it is current. So I would like us to not take an action that makes it impossible for us to conditionally allow an appliance
So
repair
in the
place
front, in the storefront with a conditional use permit.
That
Yeah.
You have to let us know that
You're all agreeing.
There's also a tool cutlery sharpening category that's allowed under personal services, and I think this is something that could be enlarged to accommodate that handy guy who can fix your widgets.
Yes.
So again, I just want to remind us that we are coming up with more general categories. We're not going to use the word appliances anymore. That's going to, I mean, it might be a subcategory or a descriptive term, but as far as a category goes, we're getting rid of cutlery, we're getting rid of appliance, and my suggestion was to go to something called light industrial that we would approve as permitted, not in a storefront, and conditionally, but you could come in for a conditional use permit in a storefront. I would be okay with that. And a question for our attorney and the commission is, we could perhaps have a blanket statement that says any use that is permitted not in a storefront could be applied for a conditional use permit in a storefront. Just blanket say that if we felt comfortable allowing that flexibility. Like if we're okay with it being in town, but just not in the storefront, maybe we'd be okay with it in a storefront on conditional reasons. And that could just solve that problem and we don't have to talk about it anymore.
I would agree with that if it's a personal service as opposed to a warehouse or a gas station.
challenge is how you define personal service.
And do we also include potentially criteria for what the conditional use would look for, like consistent with the character of the pedestrian-friendly business neighborhood, as opposed to, sort of a windowless wall, industrial warehouse type of storefront?
Well, isn't that part of what an application would be that would come before us? We would decide at that point, and they would have whatever the findings or whatever the application would say that.
Your use permit section has the standard legal findings that you have to make in order to approve a use permit for something.
So we would need to have some kind of definition as to under what conditions we would allow it to be in a storefront in order to make findings. Is that correct? Yeah.
Right.
So like, for example, if it were, we might be more inclined for it to be in a storefront if it were something that didn't make noise, or if it were something that would serve the citizens of Fairfax, as opposed to, let's say, light industrial, meaning that they make a particular thing and sell it on the large market, and no one in Fairfax particularly interacts with that. We might be less inclined to allow them to be in a storefront.
Right.
So we would need to define that somehow so that we can make findings against it, if I understand correctly.
That's what the public hearing is for. So the use permit public hearing, you hold the hearing, you hear comments from the neighbors, you craft your resolution that includes your conditions of approval, and you make your findings.
Staff is right, through the chair, and it also has to conform with the character and the building type and the architecture of the neighborhood, and as you say, the pedestrian nature, which are part of our findings.
Chair, I think our attorney had something.
Okay,
Forgive
thank you.
me. So we do have existing conditional use permit findings that have to be made in order to grant any CUP around town. But what the commission could consider is adding an additional required finding for just this type of instance, whereby if you are a prohibited use in the CC, or if you were a use that was only conditionally permitted in the back and you wanted to be allowed to use a storefront, you have to meet an additional finding above and beyond the regular CUP findings that would very closely reflect the purpose of this particular zone. And an example might be the use does not impede the flow of foot traffic through the area, that type of thing, so we're not suddenly creating a bottleneck. So that's something we could entertain.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So are we agreeing on using light industrial in that empty box there? And can we add?
Okay.
And can we add to the notes box, permitted in the rear of the building permitted in the rear of the building, only conditional permit allowed in store frontage. Yeah?
Okay. Anyone not agree? Okay. All righty, so. All right, any other comments on page 1?
Well, just the bars, whether we're going to add a subcategory under food and beverage sales for eating or drinking establishments, alcoholic. Almost sounds like a category of the Oscars, but anyway. So eating or drinking establishments, alcoholic. Or anybody agree
But
with that?
but should the use be bars and eating or drinking, or and or bar?
Thank you, because that has to be on to run the tape. I thought you were saying that bars and restaurants that serve alcohol, you didn't just want them to be permitted, you wanted a use permit review.
Might I suggest that instead of eating and or drinking establishments, we could have eating establishments as one general category and drinking establishments as another? I don't know.
Or
Well,
I could
I just-
suggest a distinction between a restaurant that serves food and also has a beer and wine license, but not a liquor license, just a beer and wine license. It would seem to me that that is, many restaurants fall in that category, and if we're trying to keep everybody from having to come before us, then that might be a category we would want to.
Right, I think that there's some, usually we
I
think
don't
of as a
really
bar where eating is kind of secondary too.
I don't have an opinion either way, but I will just tell you that more and more as the person working on the front counter, I hear more and more people comment about how many establishments in Fairfax seem to push alcohol, and even if they provide food. So the perception is that we're the go-to town. You know, there's not really any eating establishments left, I think, that don't serve alcohol. So, you know, it used to be beer and wine and brunch.
But we also have our fair share of bars
Right.
that are bars.
So you just need to
and
decide.
you might be able to get a snack, but it's a bar.
Right, so you need to decide, do you want to regulate restaurants that serve alcohol? Maybe you don't. Maybe you just want that to be permitted, and it's just the bars that would have to go.
Maybe we need a subcategory of just of bars and pubs, something like that.
Need a use permit, right?
That would need a conditional use permit.
Is there a categorization distinction for alcohol, tobacco, and firearms? Can that be a category because it all follows under an ABC licensing something or another that we could group together, that any establishment that requires a yada yada license from alcohol, tobacco, and firearms requires a conditional use permit? Is there something like that?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Yes.
Yeah, I think that might capture more than what I hear what you're saying. I think it might be a broader universe than we actually want to capture. But what I can do, I've taken notes here, and what I can do is bring back a more fine-grained look at these various types of establishments based on their ABC licensing status, and we can talk about how you want to deal with those individually.
Yeah,
Chair.
so I think.
Before we get off this page, if you could scroll back up a little. As Norma pointed out, I think the included in new CC permitted uses column has all these yeses, but you get to appliance repair domestic and it's blank, and appliance sales domestic and it's blank, which I guess means that the initial take, Katie, was not to include these, even though the general description in the new use classification for appliance sales domestic is retail uses, which would be allowed under the more generic. So would it, I don't quite understand why we wouldn't want appliance sales.
So if you're okay with them, then you should just move it to permitted. These were just suggestions on the attorney's part, you know,
Go ahead.
not knowing Fairfax, right?
But it should have had a yes.
Yeah, I think that,
So yes, in both of those, basically, is what we're talking about now.
Yes, for appliance sales. I didn't necessarily include appliance repair because that was more of an industrial use that I didn't know if you would want pulled over. So
Okay, but
we've
we
just
would
added
add
that.
yes now to that.
That's fine, yeah.
and if I remember I think what you were explaining before is you kind of took you put an X, what was the existing CC uses, and you put an X where the existing CH uses were. So so it wasn't permitted in CC presently. So does anyone disagree with not including appliance sales?
I think the commissioner's point, and forgive me if I'm mistaking you here, was that it wasn't initially included in the CC, but by virtue of adoption of this use classification of retail sales, suddenly that is a retail sale, and thus it gets to be included. Am I hearing you right, Commissioner?
That's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah.
That it should be allowed.
Yeah, and I think I was trying to say the same thing, but maybe I didn't say it the same way. Okay, does anyone else have any comments on page 1 before we move on to member from the public, if you'd like to.
I think this is on. Just before you leave the bar category, I would like to say this. I think Fairfax could use some fine dining places where you can order a cocktail. I don't think we have one, with the exception of the Deer Park Villa, which is sometimes on, sometimes off, and at the moment it's, no, I don't mean to disparage it, but it's not exactly fine dining. It's a hamburger joint. Towns like Mill Valley, San Anselmo, lots of other towns have really nice restaurants that serve cocktails. They're not pushing alcohol on children or anybody. It's being offered. We don't have that. We have beer and wine, and the only places that are serving hard alcohol are the bars. And personally, I think that's fine. When I moved here in 1976, I was singing for a living, and there were at least 3 or 4 bars that had music and laughter and fun and beer and alcohol, and it was wonderful. That's kind of died. There's very little of that left. Fairfax is one of the few towns that has that. I know a lot of people don't like that, or don't admire it, or don't want it, or think it needs to be drummed out of town. I'm just here to say, no, please, let's just have some really lovely restaurants where we could maybe dine outside, and it's all under control, and nobody's drunk and flopping in the streets or doing bad things. Thank you.
Okay.
I do not believe that we're disallowing any of the fine dining with a nice cocktail that you have recommended.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that too. I think that what we were trying to say is that, a distinction between, establishments that may alcohol is their primary focus, and then eating is secondary, versus when dining is primary. And
so I thought I got from all of you that you were willing to have the attorney look at that and come back with some finessing of that.
yes.
So you're going to look at it again. It's not set in stone.
And do we need any notes? Nope, we're good. Are we on page 2, or should we adjourn to a special meeting for page 2?
I think, yes, I agree. I think we'll go faster now.
So building supplies and lumber, when within a building, I wasn't clear on what that meant. For example, Fairfax Hardware, which is our one, to my knowledge, our one building supply and lumber store, has, of course, some of their retail items in a building and some of their retail items in the yard. But what does that comment mean to you?
So if you look on the first page, you'll see that up top we say principal permitted uses are required to be conducted entirely within a building unless an exception applies. And then we have this entry, building supplies and lumber, when within a building, which seems duplicative, frankly, because they're all required to be within a building, right? So I don't know if when this was drafted, it was anticipated that perhaps a conditional use permit would be allowed for those businesses that had outdoor sales as well, but that's my guess.
Okay, well, on this page, since we're doing this page by page, my comments are the contractors, facilities, even when that's in a building, it can easily get out of hand. They start parking larger trucks out front of the building or by its side or something, and then more, and then perhaps a tractor on a truck overnight, and then it keeps on. So I think we need to, I would actually say no under the new CC on that one. Carpenters, shops, cabinet making, we'd have to discuss what that means. Department stores, and diaper service, because diaper service can be very toxic. I mean, I don't know how we regulate the existing dry cleaners here or how they operate, but parents are warned when they have diaper services about the possible toxicity of that service. Not to the children, of course, but the process of cleaning the diapers. So that was why I said no to those 4. Thank you.
Was that a no at all or a conditional use permit? Was it no for principal but maybe conditional, or just no, not at all?
Well, again, me only here. No on building contractors' facilities, no on department stores. I can't see a Target in Fairfax. And no on diaper service, but question mark on carpenter shops and cabinet making. We need to see kind of what that's defined more as, because that's more of an artistic or craft kind of use.
I believe we have one store in town, or business in town, Madeira, that's over on Sir Francis Drake toward the east end of town, that at least, as I would read, carpenter shops and cabinet making, I would think that would fall into that category. So I think it might make sense to have that category in the conditional use, so that we get a chance to look at some of these issues that have been raised, but we don't rule it out entirely.
But is that still?
It's being changed. It's being changed to CC. It will become CC.
Okay, my notes had the same kind of thoughts as you, Phil, except I thought that those were all use permits. I kind of considered them all to be part of this light industrial category that we were missing before. So I don't know if anyone else thinks differently who hasn't had a chance to make a comment or not.
Well, I agree. I think that they are, well, I was debating whether diaper service, it seems very personal. But I definitely think, at least with the building contractor facilities, in the rear of a building, maybe, and then a conditional use for the front.
The word facilities is what bothers me. If it just said offices, it would be kind of different.
And regarding department stores, I don't think it's something, it's another thing when I thought, well, we have kind of a large square footage type of use that would be something like, Fairfax lumber, or a department store would be something like that. I don't think it's necessarily a use like that just because of its size, and would have, deliveries and things like that. I'm thinking that's the reason why it might need a use permit.
I don't think we could park a department store downtown, and so it would never be able to get a use permit even if we wanted to give it one.
If it was a chain, it couldn't.
Fairfax variety is enough of that. I think we have the best one in the world right there.
Well, we also have an organic dry cleaners, and I wouldn't want to rule out an organic diaper service company either.
Yeah, I would probably, I would tend to err on the side of conditional use permitting rather than, this is my personal opinion, would be to err on the side of conditional use permitting rather than eliminating altogether for a couple of reasons. I'd rather, if the only other way to bring it back in is to make an amendment to our town code, and we know how long that takes, if we go and eliminate a whole bunch of stuff. So that's my take on that is we can do a conditional use permit. We have to have findings. We have to have a hearing. So it's a fairly big hoop to jump through to get a conditional use permit. And again, I read diaper service doesn't necessarily even, I don't think you have to do you might have cleaning someplace else, and the diaper service place is just the delivery, the pickup, I don't know what a definition of a diaper service is, but it seemed like it's same as a dry cleaning, a professional service. And along those lines, this idea of creating, I think you called like sustainable communities initiative. I mean, while I agree we don't want to have these auto-centric things, massive areas for auto-centric, I do think we also need to think about creating a holistic community where you can get your goods and services that you need done in our town. So from that perspective, having a diaper service would be nice, so you don't have to go get them someplace else, or they don't have to drive a long way from where they are. We don't have a pharmacy anymore in town. So I think we also need to keep, when I think about this, keep that in mind, that while it might be an auto-centric service, like a whatever, it might be nice to have some of those here, because then you don't have to go get them someplace else. Diapers was one of those for me. I would say conditional use permit, maybe.
I have a comment about the diaper service, because it could be that the washing centers in the back, kind of like what we're talking about, light industrial, where the front you drop off or pick up, something like that, where it is you could walk to the diaper service and drop off, and there's a washing facility in the back or something. So I think this is just too general for the diaper service, but I agree with Shally. It would be nice to have something in town so people are not driving off. Yeah.
More like a dry cleaners.
Yeah, like a dry cleaners or a repair shop, in the light industrial.
Well, that's the thing on that one. I didn't know if they meant like the truck coming from San Rafael to pick up your diapers and going back there, or if it meant the facility right here in Fairfax. But if we can have organic, that's fine. That's great.
And maybe if we use the light industrial as the category instead of personal services, we can integrate the whole front and back as part of that with the conditional use approach that we talked about before.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So light industrial goes in the back, whether it's diaper service or a carpenter shop or a contractor's facility.
It's definitely a thread.
But did we say earlier that light industrial could be conditionally allowed?
With the conditional request. So as far as the person who's editing here, that would be the builder's contractor's facility line item, the carpenter shop line item, the diaper service line item. The classification on those would change to light industrial. The note would be, I don't know if I'm speaking too fast.
It would be permitted what I heard was permitted in the rear.
Permitted,
but allowed
no, conditional use permit in the
in the
rear.
Okay. No, permitted in the rear, but conditional use permit if they wanted to do it, some of it or part of it in the front. Or
Okay,
all of it in the front.
permitted in the rear with conditional use permit in the front. And then department store, just conditional use permit?
I thought you just wanted to get rid of it.
I really want to lobby everybody to say just no to department
Get rid of
stores. It opens things up to, you never know what ridiculous ideas someone might have to start, a discount store.
And I'm just going to weigh into this one real gently and say department stores, treating them substantially differently than other retail might have some implications that we want to think about. So we'll come back to you on that one.
Yeah, because I thought if it was going in the retail, it would be just like the other, it should have been a yes there, right?
Well, that was another one where it wasn't an immediate yes, but then once we go to a retail use, then that has implications. So that's why I'm saying that's one we'll bring back to you for further discussion.
Well, don't tell me department stores is a required First Amendment use.
it is not a First Amendment use.
Okay.
I would also like to suggest that we have catering as non-storefront use, a permitted, allowed use, but not in the storefront, because it's not pedestrian traffic. People, I mean, that's a delicatessen or a restaurant if it's a food service, but if it's a catering where you're cooking stuff there or baking stuff in the back and taking it someplace else, I would suggest that go in the back, non-storefront use.
Well, so that wouldn't place it in the light industrial category, though, right?
A kitchen would be light industrial.
If it's considered a commercial kitchen.
Okay, well, frequently catering businesses also run restaurants, so there'd have to be a...
Well, they'd be able to come in for the conditional use permit if they wanted to put it in the front.
Or maybe there's another category called food processing. So maybe add a category called...
Well, I don't really think of catering as food processing. Food processing is like Lydia's Love and Foods, where she packaged dried fruits and things. I mean, catering is preparing food, but maybe Katie.
Could I suggest something like food produced to be consumed off-site? Something like that just captures the idea it's not going to be consumed on the premises. And we would distinguish it from some things so it didn't turn into a takeout store, but is, professional food preparation for off-site consumption, something like that.
I like that. I think that I trust that you will work on these, on this wording so that we aren't making, like, for example, department stores. I think when we talked about department stores, there was kind of a unstated assumption here that among the commissioners that we're talking about a big department store like Sears, but that may not be everybody's definition of the word department store. So I think some clarification as we write this as to what we have in mind, given the commissioner's comments as to
Did you all see that edit that Michelle just made? Is that okay?
Yeah, I was just
going
going
to make sure that everybody, when anything goes on here, that you're all okay with the language. So please direct your direction to the chair and then let the chair direct to the hand.
Through the chair, I would direct that the box next to it in the notes says in the rear of the building, reflects our comments about it being a permitted use, non-storefront permitted use with a conditional use allowed in the storefront.
Does anyone disagree with that? Okay.
Can we go back to the department store?
Yeah. And I'm not quite so sure if it's something we want to flat out say not permitted, because we could have a
Well, I think
someone who could maybe come up with a local, department store that could work in Fairfax. I mean, it would be a very small. It might be more like a large retail, a variety store. So I'm not sure if it's something we want to say, but I think we would take Katie's suggestion. It's something that would come back to us.
So just to summarize for our Michelle,
Yes.
In the notes box, this would be one of those pending further evaluation to come back to us.
Pending further
cut and paste from the other ones.
clarification.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can I ask a question about the building contractor facilities? Is there one in the zone now? Is there a facility where...
we have a building contractor in the highway commercial zone right by the old Good Earth where the old gas station is. He's some kind of a plumbing contractor or something.
So what would happen?
We also have
He'd
one.
become legal non-conforming.
Okay.
Don't we also have one over on School Street, right alongside the ballpark? As you head back, coming this way.
He has an office there, but I don't know. Does he store a lot of trucks in there? I haven't walked through there recently, so.
You get a truck up there, but they have materials and stuff.
But you're talking in part of the old school. He's
Yeah.
in one. Yeah, it's more of an office. The guy over at the gas station he's got a lot of trucks, and he's talking about storing some materials and things. So
We also have the tree service. at Olean and Sir Francis Drake.
That's illegal. Illegal. Illegal and in a different zone.
Okay, any other, are we ready to go to page 3? Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like to make a comment?
How does this affect the way station, which is another community resource?
Maybe staff can comment on
It's
that.
part of Fairfax Lumber. We're talking about the away station that runs as part of Fairfax Lumber. Yeah, it's a different zone.
But we do need to address the outdoor elements of hardware in terms of the limitation we discussed earlier, because I think we may want to talk about exceptions to the limitation that the entire business has to be indoors when we're thinking about things like the hardware store.
Okay. Shelley?
This I noticed on the next section in the conditional permitted uses. Currently in the CC zone, it says that any of the principally permitted uses not conducted entirely within a building currently in the CC zone require a conditional use permit. So that's the way it's dealt with right now. And if we don't change that, then the lumber yard, the beach house, any use outside of a building requires a use permit currently.
But we don't do that retroactively. Aren't those grandfathered in?
Yeah, that would be like
Okay.
legal non-conforming or whatever, or
Conforming.
non-conforming. But going forward, or if, correct me if I'm wrong, if they wanted to do any major renovations or construction or something and needed a permit, they'd have to then also.
I just want to make sure everybody knows that the Fairfax Lumber is not one of the areas that's being changed to central commercial. It's service commercial.
And how about the other one you just mentioned? The beach house.
Yeah, the beach house, it does do outdoor sales, and so it would be the outdoor sales will become legal non-conforming. You know, they could legalize that outdoor use by going through the use permit process. But they can continue to operate the way they're operating. They're a legal non-conforming use once the zoning changes.
A new one, though, would require a CUP.
If they want to do an addition or change it somehow, yes.
Okay, are we ready to move on? For page 3?
well-
Page 3, I don't think I had any comments yet on page 3.
Yeah, so on graphic artists, architects, draftsmen, and painters, it looks to me from the fact that those are all blank that the proposal right now is to not allow them, and I'm not sure whether that, is that?
Forgive me. No, that is currently permitted in the CC, and I just didn't fill out the remaining columns because I didn't figure that there would be any changes. It wasn't a CH item that was moving over, so I can come up with an appropriate use classification for that. Thank you.
I do like the not in a storefront or when not located on the ground floor condition, though.
I think it could be something, though, that it's okay in the rear. I think what we've been talking about works for this, too, as far as just not in a storefront. Shelley?
I would also, in this instance, maybe distinguish between personal service, like professional offices, maybe a category called professional offices that included graphic artists, architects, draftsmen, those kinds of folks, and have that be a category that is a non-storefront category of professional offices to distinguish it from personal services or, professional services versus or professional offices. Yeah, I would say create a category and not in the storefront.
And then to follow up on that, you may want to then look at the offices section on page 4.
We'll get to that when we get there.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. Can I ask for one further point of clarification? And I'm loath to even throw this out there, but for these types of uses that we are tentatively assigning to either the back of the lot or the front of the lot with a CUP, do you also want to entertain the ability for those uses to be placed on the second floor with a CUP? Okay.
I would consider second floor and the back, like, I don't consider the second floor the same as retail. So if you want to have, if we were going to have be a permitted use, so I would say professional offices would be a permitted use, either second floor or back, as would, now I don't know about light industrial, I would say not second floor, only back.
I think that seems reasonable. I know there's one blank was finance companies, and I'm not sure what, I kind of thought of that more kind of like as an office use would be upstairs or rear. I don't know if anyone else has any other thoughts on that.
I felt the same way.
Is that like a financial advisor or, okay.
I guess what came to my mind was, for example, someone who helps to get loans for a house or something. They might, so it would be something that would be kind of by appointment. People would come in by appointment, as opposed to even a bank where it's more of a retail use. Right. What I was thinking, but I don't know.
I don't know if that would fall under the financial institutions category or not.
I guess. Shelley?
Yeah, I would distinguish a financial institution would be more of a retail use than a financial services, which would be more of an office use. Like a bank you could have in a storefront, or a financial, where people are coming and going, versus offices, financial offices would be upstairs or behind. So we also need to remember to direct Michelle for which boxes we're filling in with what. So I think we were talking about the box with the graphic artists, architects as the professional offices. Were there any other thing? And then the financial companies would also be professional offices. Both of those in the notes would be non-storefront, second floor permitted use.
Also, the graphic artists, architects, draftsmen, painters.
Yes. So permitted in the rear? Permitted in the rear and second floor.
And second floor.
And that would be anything that we classify as professional offices going forward would be permitted in the rear and second floor.
And not a conditional use for the front?
And a conditional, I'm fine with them being a conditional use for the front.
I wouldn't recommend that because, you know, the tax accountant on Bolinas Road who's been in the store frontage, I mean, if you say they can do it with a conditional use permit, it's going to be hard to tell them no. If you really want retail in the front, then you know, I don't know. If
Very few professional offices can really maintain themselves just in the rear or second floor. You're going to have at least a receptionist and maybe a meeting room near, you know, behind there. You might want. So there's going to be some upfront as well. I agree. It's hard to, I agree with Linda kind of. It's hard to maintain that for professional offices, being only in the rear and second floor.
No, I'm saying that you create dead space if you have offices where people are just coming and making appointments. I mean, so we already are getting, well, for years we've gotten complaints about the tax account that takes up that storefront on Bolinas Road, and we get complaints about the real estate offices because they're not retail and they got in under use permits. And so, you know, if you don't feel you really need those spaces to encourage those offices, I mean, I don't know why you're just not keeping them to retail. You know what I'm saying? There's other places in town, like the second floor above Fair Anselm, where offices are allowed. We have a lot of space where offices can go in. Yeah, any second floor. So right.
So I just like playing devil's advocate. Might I do that for a moment?
Sure.
That is one of the most awesome little tax accounting offices. I don't know, maybe I'm just a legal nerd or something. I like looking in there and imagining like Ebenezer Scrooge telling his people how to do. I don't know, that I like that office.
Well, he'll be there till he retires.
Good.
Legal nerd.
Have you ever seen
I don't
him
like
in
looking
there?
at the dead flies that haven't moved for 25 years around the fish. Okay, that's what I don't like.
Can we call you a legal nerd now?
Mimi, I like the window displays he has. I always like. So anyway, it could possibly work with a use permit. That might be one that we might want to discuss in more detail.
Are you saying that just finance? Are you saying all offices? Anyone can apply for an office at the front? I wouldn't recommend that. Then when times
I'd be
when
willing
times get
to
hard,
say no and have to go through the whole amendment process. I don't know, I mean, it's kind of like the Mr. Fix-It issue, Are there going to be, some sort of really quirky character running his office out of Fairfax that we all... Go ahead.
I have an example of that. What if we had a groovy co-working space that's offices, that's this kind of buzzy, there's some really cool, interesting co-working spaces that I've seen that are kind of buzzy and interesting, and you would want to have glass in the storefront and see what's going on, and I'm just coming up with a possible example of something like that.
That might make it more pedestrian-oriented, though, where you get people coming and going as opposed to the dead flies accumulating on the windowsill.
Right, which is why I was saying if we have that additional qualifier for the conditional use permit in the retail space that has something in there about it being an attractive, pedestrian-oriented, nice storefront-looking thing. That's totally not the language that we would use, but you know what I mean? I could see.
Katie to work on it?
I could see doing it.
Can I just throw this out there? So where I have seen this be successful, this type of use, is where you join it with something like a cafe or a coffee shop or some other use that draws people in the door. So perhaps if you were willing to think about that type of use being allowed with the use permit, it would be upon a finding that the use also offer, other uses that are likely to draw pedestrian traffic in a way that a prohibited use would not. It might be a very fine line to walk here, and I don't know if we can do it, but if that's what you're trying to get after, we could shoot for it.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
We could also consider the other idea you mentioned previously about clarifying the types of conditions or criteria that we would evaluate before we would be willing to provide a conditional use permit, like put another layer on there to ensure that pedestrian friendly, not dead fly atmosphere.
Okay, so
do you need direction? Chair does, or
so in parentheses, I was going to put findings regarding work with you, work with staff, determine appropriate funds.
You can put legal in parentheses and leave it at that. But what I'm hearing from the commission is that they would want additional CUP findings related to the use offering something that was attractive to pedestrians in a way that would distinguish it from other professional offices.
That enhances the downtown atmosphere.
Okay. You know what might be very useful when we finally get through this is to revisit our purpose description for the CC to make sure we're really capturing everything that we hope these uses bring to that part of town, and then making sure we've tied it all together.
Okay, yes, Shelley?
I also, the furniture repair, and here's the upholstery from last time. It's classified as a personal services, and I would say that would be a light industrial service, not a personal service. Furniture repair and a reupholstering is, in my mind, akin to cabinet making or those kinds of things. So I would put that as a light industrial and change that from personal services to light industrial. Again, with the note, furniture repair and upholstery. Again, with the note of permitted in the rear, not on the second floor, my opinion. And you could have I would be open to having a conditional use permit storefront. Maybe it's really artsy and it would be groovy to have it as a storefront, So I would say permitted in the rear with a conditional permit in the storefront.
So can we raise hands for how many agree with that?
Well,
Or
I
you
have
wanna
a
talk about
question.
some?
I thought we were talking about a blanket approach to light industrial.
Right.
And second floor with conditional use permit for storefront. Now you're saying, oh, but this one, I would think, are you saying that this would be light industrial?
Yes, and I question whether we want light industrial on the second floor. Question mark to you all? Part of me says, maybe we don't want light industrial on the second floor because of incompatible use with up and down stairs and over people's head. I don't know, I'm throwing it out.
I'm seeing kind of a range of things that, for example, Madera, the furniture store. You might imagine that was listed under cabinet makers, and I could imagine a cabinet maker who the only thing this business does, is to make custom cabinets for people. They go into your kitchen, they measure the kitchen, and then they go work by themselves in their shop, and nobody really needs to see them do it, and there's a bunch of wood and sawdust, and at the end the cabinets are installed in the kitchen. There's not a lot of reason to have a storefront for that. Madera, on the other hand, actually makes furniture that's kind of unusual. He uses recycled wood and makes it, and he has a very good reason to have a storefront because those are on display.
We're violently agreeing with each other.
Yeah, so there's a distinction there.
I'm saying CUP for storefront. My only question mark is the second floor. I think we're all agreeing that yes in the back, permitted in the back, CUP in the front, question mark on the second floor for light industrial cabinet makers.
Because remember, you are going to be permitting residential on the second floor, so maybe businesses that use saws and things aren't that appropriate on the second floor.
And having done furniture reupholstery, you're not likely to want a shop on the second floor.
Okay.
So, light industrial?
Yes, that should be labeled light industrial.
Can I broach another line item?
Do we have consensus about the second floor thing before we move on?
Not on the second.
Okay, so going forward, anything that says light industrial, permitted in the rear, conditional in the front, not on the second floor.
But conditional with the attorney's comments about enhancing the town center character. Thank you. Now can I ask about gymnasiums and athletic clubs?
Yes, let's.
Does that include the facility that the weight training center that's going in now? Is that an athletic club or a gym?
That's what we, yeah.
I would think it is.
Then shouldn't we have a yes in the CC column?
No, they got
Oh, that's right. They did come in for a use permit.
Right, correct.
CUP, that's right.
I think we want to continue that policy.
And by the way, there's a problem going on. The weightlifting is moving out, and there's a lawsuit going against the owner because of the vibration on all sides, including across Bolinas, has created a big kerfuffle.
The vibration of the dropping weights?
They're big.
Along with the screaming, yay, when they drop them.
They had an event apparently on a Saturday ago or something, and you could hear it up at the pavilion, and the vibration was going not only to the tangent properties but across Bolinas also. And the owner poured the slab under the non-bearing wall right into the Fairfax too. So.
Let's move on then.
Anyway, I don't know if I necessarily don't agree with the use permit, but I guess that is I mean, I think it's something we want to allow, so a use permit allows that, so. Okay, are we ready for page 4? Okay, so it looks like janitorial service is blank, and I think that's probably one of those light industrial uses. Anyone thinks differently?
Nothing yet. Oh, we need a note?
Oh, yes, I think, yes, we agree with that. Okay.
There is consensus because nobody said no. Madam Chair?
Yes.
I was thinking the laundries seem very similar to diaper services, especially since the note says we're going to include dry cleaning there. So I was going to suggest that one be also light industrial. Is that right? Is that what we decided for diapers?
We do have a laundry right on Broadway.
We have 2 laundries.
And on Center.
We have 2. But the one on Center is not exactly a light industrial, but it's not a storefront location. And the other one is grandfathered in no matter what we do.
Shelley?
My notes say that we were talking about the diaper service as a personal service, not a light industrial. Because we were comparing it to the dry cleaners, which said personal service. However, I believe we agreed that the diaper service was a conditional use permit, not a permitted use. Could we go back?
No, I thought we said light industrial for the diaper service with conditional use for storefront.
Ah.
Yeah, and
see, now this is one of those
that's
where
what
we go
I
back
have
and forth. Okay, thank you for that correction. So now I think I do agree that diaper service and dry cleaners are kind of the same. So,
well, one thing about dry cleaners is that they're terribly toxic. They're just really toxic. There's just hardly any way to clean them up.
Well, we've got our lovely organic French dry cleaning service right down the street here. I don't know how it works, but I would imagine that as humans get better at thinking of alternatives to toxics, we've got to, think about that. I think there's also a difference between dry cleaning and laundromats, but I don't know.
This combines both.
This does combine both. And I would think since it's all, if we put them all in light industrial, then they would be allowed in the back. But it seems like the laundromat does encourage pedestrians to going in and out. It's kind of alive and, happening
You do
place.
your laundry and then go to Good Earth. Sure.
same with dry cleaners or drop off pickup, in and out.
Well, you actually spend more time in the laundromat.
Well, diaper services are usually trucks that come and pick up your diapers and take them away. I don't think there are any self-service diapers services out there. Now, tetraethyl ketone peroxide is organic chemicals as well, by the way. So, you want to.
So I'd make a motion that we have a diaper service as light industrial and dry cleaning and laundromats or laundry services to include laundromats, dry cleaning, and any other future such services as clean our clothes as professional services. Personal services, if that works for everyone.
And are they permitted?
Laundry related. And they're permitted.
Got it.
And they're permitted in storefronts.
I think we may need to poll how people, because I don't agree with that. I don't know if anyone else agrees, if it needs a use permit or not.
No,
We're talking laundries and dry cleaners.
I would think a conditional use permit would be a good idea of a process to go through, and then there could even be a CEQA issue with that.
I would agree.
So who agrees with that?
But that would only, it wouldn't apply to all personal services.
We're just talking laundries and dry cleaners.
So we would just have to create a new category called laundry services if we want to segregate it out from personal services. In order to make that a CUP, then we need to segregate laundry services out separately from personal services.
That seems reasonable to me. Anyone disagree with that?
Or a subcategory of personal services.
And the rationale for doing this is because of the hazardous chemicals used in conjunction with dry cleaning and all of those types of services.
And I'm just thinking with laundry, there's lots of, just water use and things like that. And
Well, yeah, and there's two kinds, I mean, at least I know of them. There are dry cleaner services where you take your clothes to a place, and then there's a truck that comes and pick it up every day and takes it off to some industrial facility for processing, versus the ones that do it in-house. So I think the permit would at least allow us to examine what type of dry cleaning service it is. And if it's in-house and it's not organic, then we can deny the permit, et cetera. I mean, yeah. Let us not forget the terrific discussion we had about creeks and their care and toxicity.
yes.
Is there something else in our town code that already regulates or stipulates that you can't operate toxic businesses in town? I mean, is there some other, it just seems to me that I agree with you, but I'm thinking there could be some other things in here, like an upholsterer that uses toxic stuff to do rawhides, or I don't know, things like that, that I'm wondering if there's already something that says, no, there's not. Okay.
And I think in this town, you're going to have some situations where you might not be able to get the town to agree that's whether something's toxic or not. You're going to have people on both sides of the fence on some things, Some people think.
Okay, then I think a conditional use permit makes sense in the case in which we're looking at a category of something that may have a higher chance of including toxic or otherwise undesirable activities.
Undesirable environmental consequences.
It's toxic. Some people think it isn't.
Okay, does anyone, something else, Mimi?
Yeah, for both lumber yards and nurseries and garden supply stores, I think we're going to have to look at the outdoor nature of those types of businesses. I would say yes, retail to the nurseries and garden supply stores. And I don't really have an opinion one way or the other on the mail order and catalog supplies, mail services, and packing and crating, although I think those all kind of go together.
Did you guys do laboratories? And I was.
I think that one got skipped over. But so anyway, I guess we'll go back to that one since we're discussing.
I have a no for laboratories.
I think I consider it the light industrial laboratories.
Again, it depends. Maybe it's a CUP thing because it depends on what the laboratory is. If it's a small lab for testing, I think there's a lab at the vet, for example. They do testing. Sort of somewhat of a lab. They also send out to a lab. So.
I would say the soil testing lab.
It's because of that. It's because of the difference in use there.
Got to
Maybe
write the
a
words to
CUP
where people
on the
know that.
laboratories.
Well, and there's
Or
also
no,
toxins involved often.
What if laboratories were treated similarly to the way I think we just proposed treating cleaners?
Yeah, I was going to propose calling out laboratories separately and requiring a CUP. And not in storefront. So laboratories would be.
On a couple things. So there was some discussion about the janitorial services, and that was clear. It was light industrial, with the same description about it being permitted in the rear. Can conditional use in the front. Okay, there was,
And no on the second floor.
right, okay, so that's clear. Laboratories, same,
No, laboratories, a separate category.
okay.
Called laboratories, at least for now, unless we find other things that bundle up with it. Scientific laboratorial uses or whatever. No, not light industrial, because we want to call it out separately. Light industrial is permitted. We want to call this out so that we can put a
So
CUP on it.
laboratories, maybe I'll just put a question mark.
Yeah, and it's a CUP use.
CUP and not in the storefront.
CUP and not in the storefront.
Everyone nod your heads. Yes. Okay. All right, good.
Are we really allowing lumber yards?
Well, wait, before she gets there, so laundries, we talked about creating its own personal category, so not personal services, but rather laundry services.
And that was also CUP.
Due to environmental concerns.
But there was no restriction relating to front or rear. No, because everything would be CUP.
Yeah, I guess my question, if something is a CUP, which means it's going to come before us, we don't really need to delineate where we allow it, because that would be part of what we would decide as part of the CUP, right? So for now, if we put CUP, then that means that we can choose, or should we
could
still
say
delineate?
There's some that we only want in the back, and there's some we might consider in the front.
Right.
Right.
Now lumber yards.
Well, there's one before that, linen supply, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but it seems like a light industrial use.
I think it's a retail sales.
Selling handkerchiefs.
Okay, all right. I thought it might be something different, so, okay, if it's
if
that,
we're-
if that's what we think that is, then that's
If we're on,
okay.
if we're on lumber yards, I would say no on lumber yards, and that should be in the CS zone, period, and should come out of this zone, either of them.
But what if it's a small, I was, well, this was categorized originally as a retail use. So a retail use, we already have a thing that it can't be, it automatically requires a CUP if it's outside. So we know all of this stuff has to be inside. So if you had somebody who sold handcrafted wood for artisans inside, was that lumber? That's not lumber yard. Okay.
I think it's the outside sales that makes it what would require a use permit, so I think that's what I mean, normally you would need an area large enough that you'd need the outside sales. And that's the way they felt the same way about the nursery and the garden supply, because the plants would be outside and all of that, so.
Again, clarification, my understanding of what we're saying here, if we said nurseries is permitted, that means it's only permitted inside. All of these things, when we say permitted, meaning they're permitted inside, because we have another section that says anything outside needs a use permit, whether it's nurseries, clothing, chairs, whatever it is. So if there's a nursery that can exist inside, or a lumberyard that could exist inside, what we're saying though is no lumberyards ever, anywhere, no inside, outside, on them, anywhere.
Unless it's in the
we're
CS
saying,
zone.
we're saying in these zones.
Yes,
No,
in this
right,
in this zone.
right, and I think the same should apply to nurseries and gardening supply stores.
Well, what about something like the potting shed? Is that not going to come under that category? Because that is such
Well, I consider that kind of a gift shop, it's not, it doesn't sell seeds and potting soil. She has gifts, and it's not just plants. She has yard sculptures and other things in there. So if someone came in and described that type of business to me, I would think of it as like a specialty retail gift shop, It's a little bit different than the nursery over on Willow and Sir Francis Drake.
Is that nursery, O'Donnell, is that in the C, what zone is that in?
That's in the CH zone.
I mean, I would
so
look
we
at,
do need to consider these.
I would look at
mean, that'll
lumber.
be
Well, it will
grandfathered
become-
in,
it will
but,
become le- yeah, it will
but are
become a
we
legal
prepared to say
non-conforming
that
use.
that was a wrong idea and it should never be done again? I don't know why we would do
Right, and I think that we should look at nurseries and garden supply stores slightly differently than lumber yards, and I'm not sure if lumber yards is a complete no or a CUP.
It should not be a complete no, for the reason I just stated. I mean, lumber yards or nurseries, I think we already have a nursery, for example, O'Donnell, that's in the CH, soon to become CC zone, and I don't see anything wrong with it, and so why would we say that never again can that be done?
Well, can we make a decision here or make a recommendation anyway that some things be put off to a zoning category that we're not discussing tonight, such as CS, and then they're permitted under CS, but with, I mean, we can't discuss that, or, I mean, because I just think these two uses should happen, but under that with a permit.
Maybe it would help if I read your purpose section for the central commercial zone just once, to maybe it will help. Okay, I'm going to read it. The central commercial zone is the central business district and the retail commercial heart of the town. It should contain the most valuable land and structures on a square foot basis of any zone in the town. The development of the central commercial zone caters to and invites pedestrian traffic. Consequently, store frontages tend to be continuous. Driveways, blank walls, and other conflicts with or deterrents to foot traffic tend to be minimized. Second-story residential uses provide both a nighttime population, which is commercially desirable, and living facilities for owners, workers, and those without automobiles. So you have a service commercial, you have other commercial zones that kind of lend themselves to lumber yards, and I don't know that you have to, correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, you don't have to allow for them to be in your central commercial. You have other areas where they can operate. So that's what you're trying to keep in your central commercial.
Thank you for the clarification.
I can read it again later if you need me to.
So I guess I'm swayed with respect to lumber yards, but still not quite so with nurseries and garden supplies.
I think I agree with Mimi because we do have the O'Donnells, which that seems like, that I guess that will be a grandfathered use. But since the CH, it isn't allowed use in the CH zone, there's some of the more outlying areas now. I think
Maybe you
we're
should
thinking,
poll the rest of your commissioners and see if you all agree that should be.
What I kind of envision is there's something like an overlay zone that's kind of more like the down. And it's not exactly what we have, but okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we put nurseries and garden supplies as a CUP.
Does anyone not agree with that?
In what area?
The central commercial zone.
The central commercial zone, that we allow it by conditional use permit. I don't know what we categorize it, because it's that box is blank over there under classification for nurseries and garden supply stores other than retail. I mean, we could classify, no, we couldn't. If we're going to pull it out as a CUP, we can't classify it as something else that's already permitted. So
why couldn't we limit it to CS zones?
We're not talking about anything besides CC.
Yes,
we could, if we wanted to limit it, then we would say, no, you can't have it in CC at all.
Well, I think that's what we would be saying. We would be throwing them off to another zone if we said no. We're not saying no forever, permanently, for everything. And that's still my suggestion. Lumber yards, nurseries and garden supply ought to go into, not be permitted in the new CC zone.
All right, I think we should poll. Okay, who thinks no? Raise their hand. And would only in the CS. We have how many? 1, 2.
Excuse me, what you're saying is not in the CC.
Not in the CC. Okay, so we have 3. Okay, who thinks it's allowed with a CUP?
4. Okay, so that's it.
Okay, so I think we skipped one, mail order and catalog sales. So I'm not quite sure.
I have a suggestion for mailer and catalog and packing and crating as light industrial, hence not in the storefront, okay, in the back and the up.
Does anyone differ?
Allowed on the second floor.
In the back only, right?
Can,
Only in the back.
can I ask a question? The mail service,
Yes.
is that like FedEx or California Overnight?
We have a Avatar, they provide
That would
mail
be business
services,
service.
so-
I would say that's
okay,
business
that's business
services.
services, okay.
And retail.
So light industrial
Back.
okay.
No. Light industrial goes for mail order and catalog sales.
Thank you.
And I'd say mail services would be professional services instead.
Yeah, that would work, wouldn't it? Does everyone agree? Professional services on those 2?
Mail services would be professional services.
I'll just chime in here and say that typically when we see professional services in zoning ordinances, it's more like something that you would require a professional license for, not necessarily like a UPS store or.
How about personal services? Office and business services?
If it's okay with the commission, I'll take those considerations and see how they wind up playing with our ultimate classifications.
So,
Okay, thank you.
business services. I like big one. So,
Are we on page 5?
not yet.
Almost.
And packing and crating would be the same as the mail order and catalog services, light industrial, back only. It's the packing and crating right there. 1/4 of the way down, light industrial. Permitted in the back, CUP in the front.
I thought that category was a little hard to define. It doesn't seem to be, I mean, I know it's listed in the old, ordinance, but it's hard to define that and limit it, but yeah, I mean, it should be light industrial.
Okay, any more comments on page 4? No. All right, let's go to page 5. So the first blank I have is parks and public. So,
We have our major park right there.
I mean, isn't there don't we have a separate
Yeah,
land use
We
category for that?
changed all our parks to public domain, didn't we? Yeah. So,
I believe they are all included in the new public domain
Yes.
zoning district, but we should verify that before we make any final change here.
and I'm just wondering, I mean, I guess someone could try to open some kind of a private park, but I don't know who would do that, right? Well, like Rob, was it Roy's Redwoods? Rob's Redwoods, isn't that a private park that you, I thought it was. I thought you could rent it for weddings and stuff. Rob's Redwoods out over the hill, over White's Hill. Is it? Oh, okay. See, I don't know anything. There you go.
My recommendation for this one is that we say yes. We call it something like public services. I would recommend maybe for the emergency shelter or similar. Yeah. Public.
Well, we are. But are you okay if we check and make sure we've put all our public parks in our public domain designation? We're pretty sure we changed them all the zoning to public domain. Then I think we can eliminate this.
These are parks on public property. So I'm a landowner, I got a plot of land, I create a park, put a fence around it, charge admission. Do we want that?
I think we can eliminate it.
I'm confused. If somebody decides to turn their property into open space, would we say you can't do that?
Then I would imagine at that point, we might actually rezone it. If put it into the PD zone, would that be the appropriate thing to do?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I think it makes
Someone
sense to not
donated a
have
piece
that in this list.
She's
because
not saying,
it
she's not
doesn't
saying
have CC
donating,
here.
she's saying keeping it private property, but just turning it into a park. Like,
Well, it can be, because you can have a conservation easement across your private land that prohibits any development, and then it's considered open space. It's considered open space in our general plan.
But think of the definition that Linda read a moment ago in terms of, the intent of the central commercial. I'm not, if you want to go that direction, fine, but it's currently crafted, it's not.
Well, I would say parks and open space are pedestrian friendly, especially if they're.
Right. And to go the other way, there are these pocket parks, very small, intimate, private parks that actually New York has some.
The attorney is saying we should go ahead and leave it in because it can't hurt to have it in there. If someone came in and wanted to make something into a park, why would we stop?
And you could do a CUP.
No, don't.
So I think that to the extent we want to encourage.
Well, the reason
public
is because
parks-
it's not generating income for the town, one thing.
Psychic income.
karma points.
So when this comes
That's
back
very
to
important,
you,
I agree.
when the ordinance comes back to you, and we have our new principally permitted uses laid out, it'll be laid out as a table, and it'll have the new use classifications, and then next to that, how those classifications are treated. But it'll be sorted so that you have residential uses, commercial uses, public and quasi-public uses, and this would be one of those public or quasi-public uses. And there's just no harm to the town, potentially, in leaving it in for now, and unless, as Jim says, there may be other concerns to think about. But this is sort of a no harm, no foul one. So that's one way of thinking about it.
Okay, so stay in.
Okay, thank you.
So we'll leave it in, say yes, and say with a use permit.
No, I don't agree to the use permit requirement.
No, just permitted.
Just permitted?
Madam Chair, you may need the poll.
Do we need to poll use permit or permitted?
Okay, now what is the plan? Someone takes their private property and turns it into an easement or a walkway or a... Private property turned into an easement or a walkway or a private park or...
I guess it would be a
In the
situation.
downtown. Who's going to do that?
I can think of an example in San Anselmo where George Lucas did it right next to Town Hall. That was a
But
private.
that's a public domain.
Well, it wasn't. They tore down a building to build that park.
But then
And
there are also people who maintain open space and it collects garbage and other things. So public parks imply maintenance.
If you have privately owned land that causes a nuisance, there's things that the town can do to deal with that. But I think overall we should have a general public policy of encouraging and promoting a natural feel in the downtown. If somebody decided to, buy, what is the property down here where the wellness center, the family medical practice and the Casa Mañana are, and tear that down, that building, and put up a whole grove of redwood trees, I wouldn't think we would say you need to come in for a permit to do that first. I would have a problem with us saying, well, we're going to evaluate your use of the public property that way.
I would think it would be a good thing to evaluate. It really would change the character of the downtown. It would change what Linda read about what the CC zone is supposed to be for pretty substantially. So I don't see, since I think all agree that this is pretty unlikely, it's a pretty unlikely scenario anyway. I don't see any harm in saying that we would look at it with a CUP before we.
As long as it's not in the storefront.
It's not saying we're against grass, it's just saying we want to think about our downtown.
You would make somebody jump through a bunch of hoops before they took a valuable piece of downtown property and converted it to open space. And what I'm suggesting is that making people go through hoops to create open space in Fairfax doesn't necessarily seem consistent with the general plan to me, even if you are talking about valuable downtown property.
Well, I would say that maybe it's inconsistent with the general plan to not pursue infill, which is how we preserve the open space that already exists. So I think there are different viewpoints on that, and therefore I think we should be able to talk about it when and if it happens.
Can I add something to that? Wouldn't that be like a design review or require a design review? I mean, we require a design review for remodels that are 50% or more. Why would we not review a park? You know, if there's a plot of land, we would at least want to look at it. I don't know if it's a CUP, but something. Is there already something in the plan code that provides for that?
Design review, the code talks about, you know, construction. So I think your best bet, if you some of you feel you want to have a review, it would be the CUP.
All right, so I guess we should poll, because I was thinking the same thing before Esther voiced that it might be something that would be, you know, a design review thing to make sure that the appropriate plants and
definitely be a landscape plan.
Right. So anyway, so I guess we should say, do we think it should need a review or not? Does that seem fair enough?
The review is if we either CUP or we don't. So what we've got before us is you either permit it or you CUP it. And while I completely agree with redwoods, I am thinking of examples of somebody who wants to stick metal slide. I mean, you could create a park with a bunch of concrete slides and whatever. You know, I mean, you could create a park, an open piece of land that you call a park that we might not like downtown. Skateboard park, yeah, or whatever. I mean, I won't necessarily say whether yay or nay, but there could be parks that we really don't want downtown that I think
if anybody's crazy enough to tear down valuable, resourceful private property, so be it, but they have to come through the CUP process.
Okay. How many agree?
Yes to a review. Let's call it a review process. Well, CUP. Okay. Okay, any opposed?
A psychological assessment to follow.
So for the record, the vote seems to have been for the CUP process.
We have 6 for and 1 against. Okay. I see secretarial services is blank unless anyone had any other issues with the other uses listed ahead of that one. And I just see that's like an office use like we had discussed before, I think.
And residential uses on the second floor, is that just we need to define a classification? Wouldn't that be residential?
This is just a cut and paste from the existing, so that's just to show you that it was already allowed in the CC and wasn't allowed in the CH. So that's just vestigial. What we will need to do here, and we can talk about this at a different meeting, is talk about development standards and that type of thing for residential, because that really hasn't been fleshed out yet. And if I might just suggest this, you've given us so much direction with what you prefer in terms of the CUP review for various new uses. If we want to continue to get through the permissible uses, it's this page and then page 6, and then consider stopping there, staff can take the direction that you've provided tonight and revisit the conditional uses and then come back to you with that, because we might be able to shortcut that a whole lot with the guidance you've given.
And Katie, you're talking about coming back in the form of a draft ordinance.
We could do a draft ordinance. There'll be a lot of back and forth between us before it comes back to you. So if that works for you all, I think you've given us a good sense of how you want to go about this.
Okay, could you explain what this one is? Service uses allowed in the CS zone when not located on the first floor and not displacing a residential use.
I sure wish I could. That's existing language in the CC, and I don't know what was the impetus for that. Linda, I don't know if you have any history on that.
I don't have any history on it, but I can read you what's permitted in the CS zone, if that would help. Okay, uses show, there's only a few. Principal permitted uses and structures in the CS zone are lumber yards, home improvement centers, and building and construction supply businesses. The uses shall be conducted entirely within a building and are restricted to the following: warehouse, storage, wholesale, and distribution facilities having no manufacturing, processing, fabrication, assembly, or similar activities on the premises as a part or accessory thereto, and no principal permitted uses provided for in Division A shall include entertainment of customers or clientele by music, actors, or singing, nor permit any establishments of business to charge admission or entrance fees. So that's what's permitted in the CS zone.
She's
But
just reading
this
that
would
relative.
be,
So
yeah,
they're
this would be
saying-
allowing those CS uses in this zone, like lumber yards, we already talked about saying no to. So this one's going to have to be
Yeah, it's gonna have to be
almost
changed.
broken out into the different CS uses, I think.
It sounds to me from the direction you've given so far that most of the uses that Linda just listed, you had already said no to here, and you would prefer to keep in the CS. So if that's a wholesale no across the board for this line item, we can just get rid of it. Okay.
Yeah, good idea.
Okay.
Anyone disagree with that?
No. Okay, good. Did you get that? Remove that one.
So not
Yeah, just a no.
That one's just a no. Service uses allowed in CS zone when not located, yeah, that's a no. What about the storage buildings and garages?
You don't want storage and garages in your
this?
commercial, do you?
We're just putting a no.
Yeah, just a no.
And the secretarial services becomes office.
So
Professional
garages,
office.
not meaning auto repair, but just like parking garage, right?
Do you know what you need to do in the secretarial?
Secretarial services is professional office, is that, I'm sorry.
Yes, professional office and a yes.
And then I'll go back and look and see what the notes were for that, if you guys want to move on.
And then we're on to storage buildings and garages.
Okay, well, I thought that was kind of that light industrial use. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that one. Storage buildings and garages at the bottom of page 5.
Yeah, I think it's a no. Remember your,
One's a no because that's a CS. Is that what that
yeah,
is?
remember in your central commercial, you want to try to have your highest per square footage value of businesses, so you wouldn't want to have garages and storage buildings in your central commercial zone.
Yeah, also this is a bit
You
vague.
want
I didn't
retail.
know whether they meant a business that provides storage buildings or builds them, or a business that has the storage buildings in Fairfax. It's hard to know what that means, so I'm all for no there.
Okay, would you like to make a comment?
Hi. I've been told that there's a desire to retain residential within the downtown area, and there are a number of residences in the downtown area that have limited amounts of parking, and there's concerns about that, and I'm just wondering why existing residential uses that have been there since 19 whatever would be somehow limited to putting a garage in, if they're also vice versa limited from actually putting in retail in the front via parking ordinances. So either you want residences there and you would want to provide for parking at those residences, or you want storefront. And it's hard to do if the regulations are such that you can't do either, it's hard to do anything.
For the record, Todd owns a house next to 31 Broadway that's on the ground floor, so it's actually legal non-conforming and it has parking in front. So yes, we want to preserve housing per se, but the policy is for the second floor. It doesn't mean that the policy is to try to get rid of you. It just means moving forward, that's the direction. But
I think we had a comment from Shelley.
Perhaps a clarification is storage buildings and garages is ancillary use to a permitted use versus as its own thing. I mean, I'm fine with, like, you've got a storage building behind your grocery store. If that's an ancillary use to your permitted use, that's to me different than a place that's just a storage building. I don't know if there's some other language somewhere else in the land use regulations that already allow ancillary structures and uses or not. So you can look that up. We don't have to discuss it, but that might be a clarification to that. And one other question, did we talk about having housing on the first floor but in back or just the second floor? Do you know whether our current CC allows, I think our current CC allows residential, non-storefront residential on the first floor. Yes? No?
It doesn't say that. It just, our code allows you to apply for a use permit to do residential on the first floor. Yeah. No, in the CC zone.
So,
and I just want to say about the storage, okay? Storage and garages, because it sounded like some of you were trying to allow, if you're going to try to allow that in the CC, it should be with a use permit, because we already have a problem with businesses outgrowing their buildings and then they want storage. And so we've got 2 air sea land containers behind the old Good Earth. The beach house has a storage container. So I just don't think that's something you really want to see popping up all over unless you want to review it. If you want to review it with a use permit and allow people to put in storage. So you have to have some kind of way
that's
to
staff's
control it.
recommendation.
Also, to answer this gentleman, this would not preclude someone with an existing residence adding a garage or a carport. We're talking about exclusive storage and garages to park a dozen cars, not a private residential.
Would require
storage
design
space.
review, however.
Sure.
Okay, so I think we still need to direct staff.
One other thing I'd like to clarify, I'm not the owner there, I live there. 2, I'd just like to ask Norma what your thoughts were, and Jim what your thoughts were, if we are trying to provide for parking, not that it isn't cost prohibitive, but wouldn't we want to allow for the ability to put a garage underneath a structure if it were fathomable, if it were possible? I'm just wondering if we're trying to provide and draw pedestrian traffic to downtown, wouldn't we want to have open, creative ways to allow for parking that doesn't currently exist?
Yes.
Thank you for your comment. I think that was kind of my initial thought was, you know, there may be a need for these types of uses, but maybe there's something that are in the back, we don't want to see them, so maybe it is something that is more a use permit kind of a thing. But it's also maybe an accessory use to the main use of the building, so.
I mean, if you're talking about, like, if someone came in with a new commercial building, parking would be a part of that commercial structure. It's required. But you don't want to just permit storage and parking structures.
Those would, well,
right. You can make it a use
the way
permit.
that this is listed, that would be like the only use that's on the building, right. So, okay.
May I, again, play devil's advocate? We had a property owner come before the town a number of years ago with the idea of developing an underground parking facility on his very desirable piece of property that would serve also as a detention basin for flood. You remember that? For the flood scenarios that we're dealing with. And so, in addition to the parking problems that we have, I feel a little bit like if there were some truly innovative garage proposal that allowed for a garage to second as a detention basin, I'd want us to be able to think about it.
So maybe an easy way is just CUP. If you just go with the CUP, then you have a case-by-case basis, because these are rare occurrences.
But I just want to repeat what the attorney said, because in a situation that's that rare, people can always come in and apply for zone changes, changes to the code. So if they really had some great grand scheme. No, but they could petition, they could come in and ask the town to change the ordinance, right? To include them as a conditional use permit use. I mean, they would still have an avenue.
Even under that, it's an ancillary use to another structure that has other stuff. I mean, I think, no, just a garage.
What property was that? I don't remember that.
I wouldn't want to allow it as the only thing on this piece of property. Having storage buildings or garage is the only thing.
A CUP leaves the door open for some unique.
Maybe we need to pull. Okay, so what do we say? Allowed with a CUP?
What's allowed?
Storage and garages. I'd say garage. That would be primary with a CUP.
It could be ancillary also. I'm not.
That's different.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so the primary use is storage or a garage with a CUP. Who says yes? Okay, 2. Okay, who says no? Okay, 5. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I have a question before we move on. Scientific instrument and shops, or shops and services, is that light industrial?
We had another scientific instrument with
That was
with
laboratories.
labs. But what is a scientific instrument shop and service?
Could be like, microscopes.
Linda, don't we have one? Didn't we have? Isn't there one across from Town Hall? The
rock
metal
guy.
the metal detector
detectors.
guy.
If it's retail, it's retail. If you want to sell microscopes retail, oh.
I don't think of a metal detector as a scientific instrument. I know. See, but you've got me so trained to turn it on that now.
If it's retail, I mean, I think the point of getting into this is that we're trying not to say, well, these kinds of retail are okay and those kinds aren't, because then we could
So
say
the metal detector
Yeah,
shop did come to you for a use permit because it does have retail. It sells metal detectors there. It sells books. It sells things, but it's mostly wholesale.
But wasn't because it was a conversion from a residence into
no, it was because we were under this laundry
list.
list.
Central commercial zone.
No, it's because it was under this laundry list and we didn't have metal detectors on the list. If we were to do this again,
it was combining uses. It was a retail combination with wholesale. In your code right now, anything that combines service and wholesale, if you combine different types of uses, you need a use permit. So if you're not going to be entirely retail, then you need a use permit. And they were doing 2 different things there, which they owned up to that. They came forward, they said, we're not just going to be retail, we're wholesaling metal detectors.
But as far as the scientific instruments sales, that seems to me to fit within the retail sales. And I don't see a problem with that. And I agree that I don't think metal detectors.
I just don't know
fit
how
into
much
that.
foot traffic, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess
Well, I mean,
if you
if
had some
someone wants to
scientific
open a
instrument-
business in the CC zone, they're presumably paying the kind of rents that the CC zone requires. And if their business model is so insane that
that's the type of use, if someone came to my front counter and told me that they were going to strictly do resale, I would say, okay, but I don't really believe you. I think you're really going to be doing wholesale, because I don't think people, unless you have some specialty scientific instrument, you're not going to draw a bunch of people to Fairfax to buy it. People are going to want to buy it through the mail.
I'm thinking about research equipment and instruments.
I have an idea. Let's call it a professional service, and then it has to be in the back or the top. Because that's a business to business. And the distinction that I'm making is retail sales is our consumer. If we, in our definition, call retail sales consumer sales versus business to business sales, that's a distinction, because a consumer retail sale is going to drive pedestrian foot traffic. A business to business sale is not, but we can allow it just in the back and on the top. So anything that would be a professional service to another business, we could just call it a professional service, and it's in the back and the top.
Do you want to have a poll on that one? Yes. Okay.
Let's call the former scientific instrument shops and services a professional services category, not retail sales.
Just everyone who agrees with that.
Can I just chime in real quickly before we do a vote here? So another way of thinking about that, rather than reclassify this, is to say that wholesale is not retail, right? And if we're going to recognize this as wholesale and not retail, then we don't have to deal with it.
That works.
Does that work? Okay.
So then I would also add anything that we classify or that you go back and reclassify as wholesale would go into that in the back and on the top, not in the storefront.
But I don't know whether wholesale is the same distinction that Shelley was speaking of. I mean, if someone sells oscilloscopes and they sell them in large quantities, that's wholesale. They could also sell vegetables in large quantity, and that would also be wholesale. But if someone is selling either oscilloscopes or vegetables in single quantity, then the distinction is that vegetables have a much wider appeal. Many more people walk up and down the sidewalk would find some reason to stop into a vegetable store, and fewer people walking down the sidewalk would, in Fairfax anyway, would have a reason to stop in an oscilloscope store. So
I think the definition of wholesale is business to business, not business to consumer, and that's what she's getting. Is that true?
I see the point that you are making, though, that to the extent that you have an item that could be sold in either fashion, we want to capture the pedestrian element, not how it might just be the Gestalt classification. So let me think about how I work that gloss in there. Thank you for that.
So does this stay as retail uses? Because if it's wholesale,
Attorney review possible wholesale or professional services, but definitely not retail.
we're doomed. Well, it's a good thing he's taping it, because I never keep these really anymore anyway. But there's a good reason it's over with the minutes clerk.
All right, can we on the next page?
No, it's a problem because I have to speak. So that's why it goes over with the minutes clerk. That's why we should have a minutes clerk here next time we do this. Yeah. And I just moved this.
Okay.
I should have left it over there, but then it would have been in case.
I guess we're on page 6 now. Does anyone have any comments regarding swimming pool sales? So I don't know. I think that's one of those light industrial uses.
Or the CS zone.
So we can put that in?
I don't see an issue if it's considered light industrial. I mean,
So that's going to have a use permit requirement.
right, it would have a use.
I mean, it's not retail sales because you're selling,
But you don't walk out the door with a product, right?
well, I mean, there's swimming pool supplies, so if you've got a swimming pool and you're buying the chemicals to put in the swimming pool, you're going to go to a swimming pool supply store, and that seems like retail.
the CS?
Well, it kind of depends on the business.
If it's,
That's
okay.
the problem. You know, they have a lot of toxic chemicals in these swimming pool supply stores. Hydrochloric acid.
So in San Rafael,
ammonia,
the swimming
all
pool
kinds of
place is
wonderful
right
stuff.
along the freeway.
Also, if you're selling swimming pool supplies, you can't pay the rent just selling the swimming pool supplies. You have to sell the pools or the hot tubs, or you have to build the pool.
So if we go back to the purpose, what if you have a swimming pool supply store and it's a storefront with blow-up toys and those noodly things and the basketball hoops in your pools, and so it's, you know, it's got that retail stuff in the front. It's a retail variety store of pool-y stuff that your kids play with, and snorkels and diving thingies and whatever. It's a retail store. And then you can also order your pool in the back to be delivered to your house through your contractor. It's a retail store selling floaty things.
And entertaining as you make it sound, then I would consider a storefront. Otherwise, no.
CUP?
I'm just having a little bit of a hard time framing how we are going to distinguish this type of store from other retail stores if they are indeed selling the range of products. We have a pool supply store down the street from where I live, and they sell the full range of products that Shelley had mentioned. So as a legal matter, I'm going to have a hard time distinguishing what's giving you pause here that would make you want to put it into another category. So if you can help me understand that, that'll make my job easier.
I was actually advocating for retail, not light industrial, because I was thinking of floaties and noodles and sinky divey things, not big concrete pools. I can't see you fitting that. So,
But it says services. That's
well, if you're selling services and you're coming in there to talk to somebody because my pool's broken and I need to get a service guy out there, so I go buy my floaty thing and I talk to my repair guy or woman.
But would they store toxic materials or chemicals on site?
Yeah, I would probably also go in there and buy my bromine or my the stuff that I pour in my pool, or my pump. You know, I got a broken pump and I got to go pick up the widgety hoozy moetsy thing to fix the pump, and I go into the store. That seems to me a retail.
So,
I don't know how we make a distinction between those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that's a point well taken, and just to clarify that I understand the process correctly, this, if we decide that we do want to allow this as a retail, then it basically will disappear, right? Because we'll have a category for retail, and there won't be any exclusion in that category saying retail except nothing having to do with swimming pools. And so it just won't be mentioned. Nothing about swimming pools will be mentioned. That would be the outcome if we decided, as Shelley proposed, to just not make a special thing of it.
Well, I thought that we had discussed putting in the broader categories descriptions of what types of uses fit within those categories. That was part of what we talked about in January when I was questioning why we would go from specific to broad, and Norma pointed out that in the broad categories, again, the more specific things were listed.
So yes, in our definitions, we would probably give some examples to help readers understand what's included in each of the new definitions, but you are also correct that we won't include each and every line item because that would defeat the purpose of it. So it'll be a mixture, it'll be a small sample.
You're looking, it seems like, for principles, sort of distilling the things you've heard here on the commission or the council eventually, or from the public, as to what are the concerns and principles that we have. So if a concern, for example, is that we not use a storefront for something that is not the high value use that should be in a CC, then that could be maybe mentioned, but not by saying these are the 27 different things that fit that and the 34 different things that don't. Yeah.
So one of the concerns You're right, Bruce. As light industrial is that it be in the rear of the shop. That's one of the reasons for classifying it such. And if you have a swimming pool sales and service, it doesn't mention hot tubs, but typically they don't have swimming pools in the store. They have charts and maps and plans and all that, and chemicals on this, and the floaties and all that kind of stuff. So it seems like more like retail to me too.
Okay, do we, I guess, need to, now I'm torn, but I think it could be valuable that we could have a hot tub store in Fairfax, I think.
So
Isn't
here's
this
one way we
kind
could
of
get
what-
over our anxiety about the idea of somebody selling swimming pools in the storefront is down below where we have warehouses. We might have, we could add warehouses and large equipment sales or something like that someplace else that is light industrial. So if you're selling swimming pools, you're selling a cement mixer, you're selling a big, huge thing that is an industrially kind of thing, then that has to be different.
So isn't this the kind of thing, Linda, that you do at the front desk, where someone comes in and they give you some sort of idea of what they have in mind, and you figure out where that fits into our code, and then bring it to us accordingly? So, for example, if someone comes in,
I take it to Jim.
right. So if someone comes in and says they want to sell floaty things, then you might say, that sounds like a retail use.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone comes in and says, I'm envisioning a place that we used to have a bike shop that was down where the metal detector place is, right? That was a bike shop only in the loosest sense, because
Right.
there weren't even any bikes in there.
Right.
All there were a couple of desks and computers and a really nice coffee machine. And the idea was it was more like an architect office.
Yeah,
you
you
know,
went
you
in
come
and
in and
they
get someone
designed
to
your bike
architect
for
a bike
you,
for
right,
you. And so
right.
it seems to me that that's the kind of judgment that staff can make as to what categories these fit into, and doesn't have to be a judgment that we make now in saying anything that has to do with swimming pool is
It's gonna be
either
okay. That's
like
true.
retail or like an architect or like light industrial. It could be any of those. I could imagine any of those things.
Yeah, and we have a form called a commercial use analysis form where they have to give us, pretty specific information about their business that helps us make that decision. So we don't just rely on a verbal description of what they say they're going to do. They can, if we're not sure, they fill out a form and then we all talk about it and we decide together, and Jim has the final say.
Well, but also, if I think it's controversial, like the tattoo or the weightlifting, I'll try to err on the side of the public process.
Okay.
The tattoo shop is not listed here. Does that fall into a different category? Is that retail?
So tattoo would probably be considered personal services.
I have, I don't know if we decide what to do with swimming pools, but I'm just ready to move on.
We're going
Oh, yeah, we should.
Well, that particular one, thanks for keeping up with us, by the way. It's not easy to do this.
I think what I thought I heard you say is that you wanted to leave it retail, but you know that staff has some discretion. If someone comes in and says they're not going to have floaty things and they're just going to have like large, I don't know, equipment, we would say, hey, that doesn't really sound like retail. I mean,
Right, well, typically, they'll have maybe 4 or 5 hot tubs for people to
right,
look
on
at.
display,
which
and
is
they'll have like
that
colored
type of thing.
chips for the wood that you want.
Exactly.
Right, so we would say, okay, that sounds like retail, but if they were going to do anything weird that didn't sound like retail, we could say, doesn't sound like retail.
Yeah, so retail with a CUP, yeah. No?
No, retail has no CUP, just retail. Floaties and
Just retail.
I mean,
So what-
if it's not retail, if it's, okay. I'm
Right,
having
well,
trouble,
if you have a problem with it, you'll bring it to us, so.
I'm having a problem with it being retail because all the swimming pool stores I know seem to be in industrial areas in other towns.
Right.
They aren't
and so,
they aren't in the downtown corridor where all the cute shops are on the street. They're out along the freeway across from the Civic Center and stuff.
So correct me if I'm
So-
wrong, but it sounds like what you're saying is you would lean toward it not being mentioned, us not
Yes.
calling out swimming pools.
I would, but-
Sales in any way.
But then there also
And you
used to be
decide.
a really lovely hot tub store in Santa Fe that was on a frontage, you know,
Yeah, that
Cooperage
doesn't
House.
say we
Cooperage
can't have
House,
one.
right?
It just says that we can only have one if it fits into a category with the principles of the category as we're
Yeah,
going
so
to
my
delineate.
recommendation would
That-
be it
that
would be a
makes sense.
CUP, and they'd have to convince you guys that it was going to be.
If it was a
Cater to
CUP,
foot
we'd have to,
traffic.
if it was a CUP, we would have to call it something other than retail in order to distinguish it from all the other retail, which is not CUP. So we would have to come up with a category for it that calls it something different than retail. Because right now, all retail is allowed, permitted, front, back, top, bottom, anywhere. So if we want to CUP it, then we have to call it something else.
Which would be okay. I mean, if someone found some back.
Which it is sort of, because they may stock pumps and stuff and, you know, wires and pipes and all that. So that's sort of light industrial. Has to be within the building, et cetera, so.
Madam Chair, I think it's time to poll or go on.
No, it sounds like we might have a.
Yeah, I think there's a consensus.
Can I just point this out too? If they actually came to Linda and said, I want to sell floaties and snorkel gear and, you know, a pool sweep, she would say, okay, you're a retail shop. And none of this would ever come up. If they came to her and said, we're a design showroom for in-ground pools and spas, she'd say, well, you're not retail. You go over here. So the issue would kind of disappear.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Light industrial.
Moving right along.
So, tool and cutlery sharpening. I mean, it's like, yeah. I mean, can we require that it has to be in a horse-drawn carriage?
I'd like to move that we consider upholstery shops. We already had the other upholstery thing, and we just make it the same thing as the other upholstery thing.
Yeah, I agree, and then.
That was light
it's
industrial.
The same with tool and cutlery.
Do you have consensus
On which,
Light industrial permitted.
wherever you are?
Upholstery shop is light industrial. I think the tool and cutlery sharpening thing, though, is personal services, because it could be, it's something, you know, you bring your knives to the sharpener, the fix-it guy. I mean, it's the same kind of thing as the little fix-it guy. You walk in, you give them your knives to sharpen, you go buy something else, you come back and pick them up.
Yeah, it could be more retail-y, yes.
Well, if it's personal
I think it's
services, it's
right
in
the
the
way it
back
is.
and upstairs, not in the front.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether ticket agencies was more professional services. I mean, are people really going to walk into a store to buy a ticket for something? A storefront? Because I buy all my tickets online.
It's not storefront, it's a personal services, which is back and up, not front.
Backing up, not front. Okay. Never mind. And then I was kind of leaning towards a no for warehouses, but I don't know.
Hooray.
I think I heard 4.
So was there reference to, for personal services, that is either in the rear or up front? So that is new, because in the beginning, when we discussed some of the personal services, we didn't include that.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So is that okay?
No, you're right, thank you. You're right, personal services, we were, what? Oh, like a barber shop or a hair cutting place or whatever?
Nail salon, yeah.
It was the offices, it was
And
the
that's why I was
professional
thinking
offices that are
ticket
backing up.
agencies
Is a professional office,
is a
not a personal
professional
service.
offices.
Sorry, you're right. Ticketing agency would be a professional service, not a
Yes.
personal service.
Okay, professional office.
Second floor.
Or rear.
Right, business office.
Okay.
So is it sorry, I was just going to say, so is a tool and cutlery sharpening personal service? Okay.
I thought it was on. All that stuff that's written there, it says that it has to be enclosed in a building with soundproof construction. And so I had wondered, how would soundproofing get into the proposed categories? I guess we would have a category. It's proposed here that it be a specific category: animals, hospitals, and veterinary services, and maybe it would say in that category that there has to be attention paid to the noise level for the neighbors.
That's right.
Okay.
The table that I'm envisioning bringing back to you in the far left hand will have the proposed use, and then whether it's permitted, conditionally permitted, or prohibited. And then in the far right, there would be a column for additional notes, and that would have numbers like 1 through 10. And number 1 could say perhaps, go down and reference requires soundproof construction in order to be permitted in this zoning district.
Okay, so I guess warehouses?
Warehouse, I'm a no. I'm with Mimi on that.
How many?
Anyone think that it's a use permit or?
It doesn't meet
No.
your general plan.
Right. So, and doesn't preclude anyone from having a storage area as part of their business if they've got a retail business or something in the front. It doesn't preclude them from having, storage area in the building.
In the building, right. They can
Okay.
do that as part of their business.
I only had another comment is, and I don't want to get into this, but it seems like warehouses and nurseries were not listed in your CS, so maybe at some point to review the CS in light of this, because if we don't want it here, we do want it to be, we might need to make it allowed elsewhere. If we're taking it out of here, we don't necessarily want to say that it can't be allowed anywhere in the town, but if it's not listed somewhere else in the town, then we're basically taking it out completely. So we don't have to get to it now, but maybe at some point to review anything that we took out completely from either the CH or the CC. Does it go someplace else because it's not already there? Like CS.
I think that's a good question. and
Well,
good
I
point.
think the CS, it's a kind of a general description. I think it allows them. Want me to read it to you again? No, you don't.
We don't have to deal with it now.
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
think it's already
suggesting in the
allowed.
future.
I
If
think
you
it's
think it's
allowed
already
in
allowed, then
CS.
that's great. I'm just suggesting that.
The way I read it, it's what's allowed.
I think CS is broad enough to allow these things as it is.
Yep.
Mimi, you have a comment?
Yeah, for yard goods stores, I don't think there's a distinction between garden supply stores that we've said no to and yard goods stores. So I guess just going back to something I was totally outvoted on. I still think a garden supply store sounds like retail if yard goods store sounds like retail.
Here, I thought yard goods stores meant selling cloth by the yard.
I think Mimi has brought up an excellent point because I think we previously had nursery and garden supply together as one line item, and it sounded like you had strong feelings about not allowing nursery. But to the extent that it is just garden supply or here just yard goods, would you view those as retail uses? Can you provide some direction?
I think if the use is within the building, I mean, that's really, I think, what the issue is. It's when it has an outside component to it that's what triggers a use permit, and that's what you think a nursery as being more like an outside
Outdoor
use.
supply.
It's mostly outdoor. There's a limited amount of indoor. But
I agree.
How about garden, yard, and pool supplies? Sorry. No, not supply, goods. So you can do the floaties with your garden and your yard.
So a bonsai nursery that was completely contained in one room would be okay. Sounds good to me.
No, you've
Not
taken
to-
nursery
You guys are getting very good.
Bonsais.
It depends on what the yard goods are, of course, but
Well, there's the Urban Farmer, that's the store in Mill Valley where they just sell all the drip fittings, and it's completely contained inside.
Okay, so, any other comments?
I had, on this page, I had to ask you what no principal permitted use provided for in Division A above shall include entertainment of customers or clientele by music, actors, or singing, etc. Why would that be mentioned in CC?
Why would that be mentioned in CC?
It's
Right, because I believe in the CC district that exists now, that's a lot of what we have is.
But they all are operating under use permits. Anyone that does live entertainment has a use permit.
Okay,
And
so
that's
then
the
we
way the
need
town
to.
wants it, because that way they can, I mean, in the past, they've wanted to control those live entertainments to keep the sound, because it bounces around in our valleys, and if it's too loud or they don't close the doors, it annoys the neighborhood.
Okay, so then we want to say with a use permit there. We
Phil,
want to.
that's why it's listed no permitted use. See, we're all in the permitted uses.
Right,
So
right,
those type of uses need a conditional use permit. So that's what the wording is stating.
Okay, very good. That's fine.
Did we agree that garden and yard goods stores is a retail use?
Yes? Anyone think different?
Wait.
And then was warehouses, no?
I think we all agreed that was a no.
What about wholesale
Okay,
and then
so
the windows?
Wait, now I'm confused. Staff's confused. So yard goods stores sells things that you use in your garden but doesn't sell plants? Is that what I'm understanding a yard goods store is?
I think what we were
Because
drawing distinction between and asking Katie to look into was, is there a way to distinguish a nursery?
Okay, so that's getting more attorney. Okay, I missed that somehow. Sorry.
Need a note?
Yeah, I think we do, because I was confused. Do you have that?
I think we're just dividing these up, so nurseries becomes a standalone that we're dealing with, and we're saying no nurseries, but then garden supply, to the extent it's all indoor, then falls under retail, and we just deal with it as retail. Is that correct?
Yeah, but you need to change the CUP required to no.
Right.
Oh, right.
Nursery becomes a standalone. I was just gonna reiterate what you said. So the nursery, you're gonna break just further. Right. Attorney review. Or do you want to be detailed here? Okay, right. Okay.
Okay. Let's make time.
Okay, so,
We've got public.
oh, I'm sorry. Would you like to make one more comment?
Sorry, Todd, can you hit the button?
Sure.
You don't have to hold it, yeah. Thanks.
We're all here late trying to do good things, I think, for the whole city. I just want to note I'm the only one here that, as far as I know, that might be affected by some of these changes. So there's a lot of people who couldn't make it, aren't aware of the process, that are going to be affected by the decisions that you make. And I would think some of those people include the owners, the occupants, and the business owners. And they have leases that run, and plans that have made and significant costs and impacts based on how you decide these things. And I'm asking you what you consider to be a reasonable time and method to make sure each and all of these people that are affected become aware of the impact and how they should be notified so that they are aware of what's going on.
So, Madam Chair, if I may.
Jim,
So
if you go.
we are in a working session right now, excuse me. We're crafting an ordinance. And the next step will be drafting an ordinance. And we'll probably bring it back informally once as an informal ordinance. I'm not sure yet. But when that ordinance comes back ready for them to make a decision, it will be what's called the first reading. And every property owner and every occupant, what's that?
Because, it comes to them first, just
Right.
for a recommendation to the council.
No, I know that. But even when it comes here, it'll be a public hearing.
Right, I thought you were saying they had a first reading, the
No,
second.
excuse me, I beg your pardon. Thank you. No, you're right. So when it comes back to them for a formal hearing, all the property owners will receive a notice and all the tenants will receive a notice, and within 300 feet.
Well, we did 500.
500 feet. We went beyond the code, 500 feet. So this meeting tonight was publicly noticed on the town's website and 3 public spaces, but we will go the next step when it comes back for formal consideration by the Planning Commission, and what they will be doing is approving language that then gets sent up to the town council. And then when it gets to the town council next, the same exercise. All the property owners will be noticed, all the tenants will be noticed, and people within 500 feet will be noticed. It'll be a public hearing, a formal public hearing. And then if it's passed on the first reading, at a normal business meeting for the second reading, it will go through the same process, a public hearing. And then it will go into effect 30 days after the second reading. So that's the way the public process is set up. It is frustrating, Todd, actually, it is very frustrating because how much work we do that people are not plugged in. But there are requirements by law on what we have to do to publicly notice. It's invariably unfortunate that some people don't wake up to the last minute, and then things can go into overtime and overconsideration depending on the politics of it. But that's the process laid out.
Yeah, and we also publish a notice in the IJ
Yeah.
when it gets to, when the final ordinance is coming before them.
Right. So government work like this in creating ordinances, which are laws, if people don't plug into the process, we can't go out and grab them and drag them in here. There's a set process, and the town has gone to the length of televising. This is being live fed right now. This video will be archived within a couple of days on the town's website. Any of these meetings going backwards, all the things that were listed in this staff report, all the meetings that were references, were recorded. There's also formal minutes that will be made tonight and be a hard record. So this is government work. This is, we are required to operate in the public. No more than 2 of these people can talk about any of these items that are discussed tonight outside of the public hearing environment. So these are prescribed laws that sunshine how things are crafted in the public. And then any of these decisions that are made ultimately going up the food chain from the Planning Commission to the Town Council, someone can come in and say, I don't like that, let's go back and redo it. Even a general plan can be amended 4 times a year.
Through the chair, thank you for that description of the overall process, but I understood this gentleman's concern where you were talking about existing leases, that existing businesses. It is not retroactive. So if you have a nursery or the laundromat, or if you sell the doohickeys for the pools, you're grandfathered in and you continue to do that. No one will have their business disrupted?
With the caveat that
An existing business.
an existing. Now, let's say that business were to become legal non-conforming. In other words, it was there by right before, and now it's getting eliminated, like the veterinarian business. When this was discussed at a public hearing, the owner of the vet business showed up and participated and said, look, I may want to expand my vet business. So we went to great length to make sure in these drafting procedures, the veterinarian is now going to be an allowed use in the CC. So people have got to plug in. You know, you've got to pay your dues to get a piece of the process here. You're doing that. Thank you, by the way, for showing up tonight. So, and thank you.
I think that was one of your primary concerns, that people would no longer be able to do what they're doing, and that's not the case.
Yes, and it does, if they are legal non-conforming, however, it does limit what they can do in the future. So if they do a remodel or they do some other big thing to their business or their residential unit, because they're legal non-conforming, they are subject to a different set of legal standards than they were in the past.
But they still
But
could.
any major change of that level would still require people to come in for a use permit, so that doesn't change.
Right, and they can always say, we don't like that language. We want you to change it. And we can amend the zoning ordinance, and we can change the general plan.
Well, and I heard Katie say, though, that if it was legal non-conforming and it was now no longer permitted, that it would take an amendment as opposed to a conditional use permit.
So depending on what you wanted to do, you may find yourself in a different position. And we can talk about how the different approval mechanisms that we've discussed tonight would impact an existing business that became legal non-conforming as a result of the change.
Okay, I think we should, forgive me, Madam Chair, but the hour is getting late. We've got a lot of staff here.
Yes, I agree. So I guess we're in commissioner comments and requests. So I guess how do we move forward now on, I guess Katie's now going to take our comments and consolidate something, and then.
Are we done?
Well, we decided we were going to, on the permitted, we're going to stop here at the permitted uses, right?
If you don't mind, I think you've given me plenty to start with, but more to the point, that the guidance that you've provided will inform how we set up the conditionally permitted uses for your further review and might streamline that review. So that's why I was suggesting if we wanted to stop here, we might be able to make the next part go a little bit quicker for you.
And again, well, we can talk about it offline on.
Well, I just wanted to say I thank you, Todd, for being here. And as Jim said, it is frustrating sometimes when you're involved in the public process and go to meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, all of which are noticed, and you can't talk with the people on the committee, and you have to go through all that stuff. And just trying to do your best to do it all right, and then nobody shows up. So thanks for showing up and for talking. And thank you, Katie, for your comments and for your work on this already, and for your listening well. I think this is going to work well. It generally doesn't work too well to try to wordsmith something to the nth degree in a committee, so I think this is the right process. You take it, make something consistent and sensible out of it, and then you'll probably come back to us and say, I noticed something that, I think this is the right process.
And I'd like to thank Michelle and Linda also for staying up late and being here on an extra night. So thank you all. And thank you all. It's just a pleasure serving you. This is really, it's just so gratifying. You guys are just doing great, and it's an honor to serve you.
Well, before we leave, I just have a drafting comment on the ordinance that's before us, in section 17-008-030, use classifications. That paragraph just doesn't read really well with the little ones in parentheses, and my comment is, see if maybe that can be broken out slightly, like an ABC or something. just as a drafting, I mean, thinking forward, who might look at this? A court, a judge, a jury, whatever. I think that's just a little bit.
Bite your tongue. I hope we don't get there. I'm
I
sorry,
always
that's section
look at that
030.
possibility.
Section 030?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's on page, well, it's on kind of page 2.
Yeah, okay.
It's okay once you figure out what the ones in parentheses aren't sections of it.
Let the record show Commissioner Green is an attorney, as is Commissioner Newton.
Okay, I think Esther had a comment.
I just have a request for the draft. Can we include the new zoning map just as a reference?
Yeah.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Okay, so I don't know how Katie's going to assemble our comments and then try to then streamline the conditional use permits. So I guess then we'll then schedule this for, I think it worked well having it as a special meeting separate from our regular business.
Sure, then I'll poll you guys.
I don't know how anyone else
I'll
felt
poll
about
you
that.
on when we can get together again.
Okay.
And as an enticement, if Mimi can get here a little early, and everyone, I'll get some pizza and salad too, feed you.
Well, there's an idea. Yeah, we could show up a little earlier if we can notice it earlier. That's the trick there.
It's a special meeting. It's up to you.
We're not going to get to the Airbnb stuff, right, tonight?
The only subject tonight was this. That's it.
Okay, it's just there was a handout, a letter from someone.
She just dropped that off and asked us to give it to you. So we gave it to you.
I'm sure Airbnb will be coming back to us someday.
I have some definite thoughts about it.
I'm sure. Okay. And remember, I'm going to be bringing back a list of ordinances. Oh, I'm sorry.
Make a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Are you seconding?
Second. I second.
Okay.